buenos días a todos aquí en México y buenas tardes en Madrid. A nombre de BBVA les doy la más cordial bienvenida a este segundo día de trabajos del Edufin Summit 2022, que en esta ocasión lo llevamos a cabo desde el auditorio de la Torre BBVA en la Ciudad de México. A lo largo de esta mañana continuaremos profundizando en la importancia de fomentar la educación financiera en todos los niveles, alineados a las prioridades estratégicas del grupo, mejorar la salud financiera de nuestros clientes y contribuir a la transición hacia una economía más sostenible con un especial foco en la educación y las capacidades financieras digitales. Antes de iniciar con nuestra agenda de esta mañana, quiero agradecer a todos los ponentes y aliados que estuvieron ayer desde Madrid y a los que estarán hoy en México, así como a todos los asistentes presenciales y virtuales que hoy nos acompañan. Para dar inicio a la agenda, los invito a escuchar el mensaje de apertura del ingeniero Eduardo Osuna, vicepresidente y director general de BBVA México.
Hola, buenos días. Para mí es un gusto poder enviarles este mensaje de bienvenida al Edufin Summit 2022. Saludo a las autoridades, panelistas, moderadores, medios de comunicación y a todas las personas que nos acompañan de manera virtual y presencial a este evento. Como saben, México tiene un reto importante en materia de bancarización, donde solo el 47% de la población adulta tiene una cuenta bancaria y el 95% de las compras menores a 500 pesos se hacen en efectivo. Además, somos uno de los países con mayor índice de informalidad, con 54.7%. En BBVA nos hemos comprometido con el impulso a la bancarización, ya que sabemos que esta es una palanca clave para combatir la informalidad y así impulsar el desarrollo del país. Los cambios de hábitos del consumidor se han transformado de manera acelerada en los últimos años con tendencias en digitalización y comercio electrónico. Estamos ante una oportunidad única que no debemos dejar pasar. Por esto en BBVA lanzamos el programa de educación financiera en México, con el que desde 2008 hemos impactado la vida de más de 16 millones de personas a través de más de 6 millones de participantes en talleres impartidos, más de 10 millones de visitas al sitio de educación financiera, impulso herramientas con 90% de la oferta digital contra el 20% en el 2018. Esto además de alianzas estratégicas con grandes organizaciones e instituciones gubernamentales que nos han ayudado a llegar a más personas. En este 2022 proyectamos impactar a 10 millones de personas más al cierre del año. Estamos comprometidos con impulsar la inclusión financiera en México mediante acciones dirigidas a la sociedad, nuestros clientes y nuestros colaboradores. Alineado a la estrategia para el crecimiento inclusivo, hemos adoptado el reto de no dejar a nadie atrás, generando conciencia y oportunidades para toda la población que vean en BBVA un aliado para lograr sus metas a través de la educación financiera con iniciativas como el Banco de Barrio, ventas por catálogo y atención a colectivos vulnerables. Este compromiso es permanente y seguiremos impulsando acciones que amplíen nuestro alcance en cuanto a perspectiva de género, jóvenes, grupos vulnerables y, por supuesto, las pymes. De cara a nuestros clientes, hemos volcado esfuerzos para acompañarnos en la estrategia para mejorar su salud financiera con iniciativas que les ayuden a medir y mejorar su situación financiera. Esto apalancados en nuestros modelos de datos, continuaremos asesorando a nuestros clientes en la adopción de nuestros productos y servicios que mejor se adapten a sus necesidades para lograr mejorar su salud financiera. Hemos diseñado un plan de acción para elevar la cultura financiera de nuestros colaboradores que abarca desde fomentar el ahorro para generar un colchón financiero hasta herramientas que les permitan incrementar el ahorro para su retiro. No debemos olvidar que para lograr mejorar los niveles de inclusión financiera en nuestro país, la educación es clave. Brindar conocimiento financiero favorece a que las personas de los colectivos más vulnerables puedan acceder al sistema financiero y tengan al alcance mejores oportunidades. Sin duda, este es un gran desafío para nuestro país y en BBVA estamos comprometidos con seguir invirtiendo por el impulso de la educación financiera y la digitalización como palancas principales y así contribuir con la sociedad para un desarrollo sostenible. Muchas gracias y de nuevo bienvenidos al evento.
Agradecemos al ingeniero Osuna su mensaje y ahora invitamos a Mauricio Pallares Coello, director de Educación Financiera y Chief Marketing Officer de BBVA México, a que nos acompañe al escenario para dirigirnos un mensaje en el marco de esta inauguración.
Bueno, muy buenos días a todos, bienvenidos y gracias a todas las personalidades, autoridades que nos acompañan. Yo voy a ser muy breve, quería nada más darles la bienvenida Y un poco comentar, bueno, pues que como saben, BBVA es una empresa en la que tenemos como propósito poner al alcance de todos las oportunidades de esta nueva era, pero eso pasa por un montón de cosas, y dentro de ese montón de cosas pues está el tema de la salud financiera de las personas, ¿no? Y entonces, además de los servicios bancarios tradicionales que ofrecemos, pues nos hemos preocupado mucho por darle a las personas herramientas, información y herramientas para que puedan tomar mejores decisiones financieras. Y estamos conscientes de que el esfuerzo nunca va a ser suficiente, porque este es un tema muy, muy grande, y entendemos que no podemos hacerlo solos. Y en la medida en que tengamos mucha gente trabajando con nosotros y que vayamos en el mismo sentido, pues tendremos más impacto y podremos ayudar a más personas, ¿no? Entonces, para nosotros es un gusto enorme tenerlos aquí y pues que de este Summit salgan muchas ideas, muchas cosas, y que podamos hacer realmente todos como sociedad, como empresas, como autoridades, algo que de verdad le ayude a las personas a no sufrir por el dinero, ¿no? Nosotros estamos trabajando, seguiremos trabajando, pero pues necesitamos en esto echar todos, echarnos la mano, ¿no? Entonces, bienvenidos, muchas gracias y saludos a todas las personas que están conectadas y que sea un éxito como ayer. Muchas gracias. Y me faltó lo más importante, que es presentar al presidente de la Conducef, al licenciado Oscar Rosado, que nos acompaña, que además he de decir que es muy activo, además de todo lo que hace como autoridad. Tenemos, por ejemplo, un chat que se formó por iniciativa de Oscar, donde estamos colegas de otros bancos, hay gente de la prensa, hay especialistas, está gente del MIDE, y es un chat donde realmente se comparten un montón de cosas alrededor de lo que tenemos que ver todos los que estamos en esta industria, y muchos temas de educación financiera. Entonces, a mí me consta que Oscar ha sido un catalizador de todo este movimiento, de toda esta transmisión de información, y pues es un placer y un gusto poderlo tener aquí, ¿eh? Muchísimas gracias por el espacio, Oscar. Bienvenido.
Muchísimas gracias, muy buenos días a todas, a todos. Pues sí, tenemos un chat, ahí les vamos contando, es bastante interesante. Siempre es bueno estos grupos de servicios de mensajería, no voy a decir de cuál, porque ya saben la marca, y no se trata de citar marcas, pero una idea tan simple ha jalado, ha funcionado, creo yo, básicamente porque compartimos muchísimos contenidos de interés. En el fondo del asunto, no hay nada nuevo bajo el sol, hace rato lo decía. Son los mismos, los mismos temas, pero con diferente enfoque, y lo que cambiaron radicalmente son dos cosas: los instrumentos y la velocidad de transmisión. Pero de ahí afuera no hay nada nuevo bajo el sol, ¿eh? Muchísimas gracias a todas, a todos los que están aquí. Saludo con muchísimo gusto a Eduardo Osuna, director general de BBVA. Agradezco su invitación para participar en este quinto evento de Edufin Summit 2022. Pues el tema de la educación financiera es importantísimo para nosotros, para la Conducef, para el Gobierno de México, y sobre todo creo que la educación financiera, aunque tiene un nombre que yo siempre he sostenido, que es matapasiones, es poco sexy y atractivo. Imagínense a un joven, a un centennial, le dicen: te vamos a capacitar, vamos a hablar de educación financiera. Debe ser espantoso. Educación, y todavía peor aún, financiera. Digo, no hay algo más interesante de qué hablar o qué ver en internet o en el celular. O sea, el mismo nombre creo que juega en nuestra contra, ¿no? Por eso a veces yo opto por hablar de finanzas personales, ¿no? De alfabetización financiera. Tampoco me gusta mucho ese término, pero es un poquito más generador de la idea de que necesitamos caminar para dar contenidos mínimos, herramientas mínimas para entender, para conocer. quiero reconocer que BBVA es pionero en este tema en el país. Ya hizo una explicación, Eduardo, ahí bastante clara de todos los esfuerzos que ha realizado la institución desde hace años, pero creo que en este momento el esfuerzo de alfabetización financiera que realiza el banco a través de productos de captación, pero sobre todo de crédito, puede ser la clave. O sea, una de las claves para poder acceder a un crédito sería dar los elementos mínimos de lo que es, de las posibilidades que tiene, pero sobre todo también en ejercicio de la transparencia, la información suficiente y clara de cuáles son los derechos, también los riesgos que significa el crédito. Una de las preguntas que yo me hago reiteradamente es, sí, inclusión financiera, pero ¿para qué y cómo? O sea, tenemos un gravísimo problema de estrés financiero en el mundo. Hay una epidemia silenciosa que está atacando a millones de adultos, mujeres y hombres en el mundo y en este país. No es el COVID, es epidemia silenciosa, sigilosa, que va destrozando día con día la vida de las personas, que genera angustia, ansiedad, que genera violencia intrafamiliar. Se llama estrés financiero. Hay una deteriorada salud financiera de todas y todos. Hace 2 semanas platicaba con un director de un banco, uno de los grandotes, y le decía, oye, hazte una encuesta de salud financiera dentro del banco o dentro del grupo, te vas a llevar un susto. Y me dijo, ya hice algo y sí me asusté. O sea, yo invito aquí al banco que haga lo mismo. Ahí Eduardo comentó algo, pero creo que sería muy sano hacer encuestas mínimas de salud financiera. En la Semana Nacional de Educación Financiera yo voy a hablar de esto y voy a hacer propuestas al respecto. Pero yo invitaría a ello aquí al grupo, y no tan solo a este grupo financiero, sino a otros grupos comerciales, empresariales, mercantiles, en general a la iniciativa privada, y por supuesto lo voy a empezar a invitar al sector público, en el sentido que es necesario hacer una encuesta de cómo estamos, porque nos podemos llevar una gran sorpresa como este director de un banco, de un grupo financiero. Porque si estamos hablando que hay una deteriorada salud financiera dentro de funcionarios y empleados que toda la vida han estado en esto, algo grave debe estar pasando afuera. ¿De qué se trata? Esa es como la parte oscura. ¿Qué es lo que tenemos que hacer? Yo creo que una de las cosas mínimas que tenemos que hacer es lo que ya está haciendo aquí el banco. Los contenidos mínimos de alfabetización financiera para la captación, pero sobre todo para el crédito. Tener información clara, entendible, en un lenguaje coloquial. Existe la construcción cultural allá afuera de que lo financiero es un asunto de ricos, de empresarios y de hombres. Hay una connotación clasista y misógina en el tema. Esa es la realidad allá afuera, así se entiende allá afuera. Yo le digo a mis colaboradores, hay que partir de una premisa cuando coloquemos y demos información sobre temas financieros. Los raros, los extraños, los que estamos fuera de lo normal, somos nosotros que hablamos de finanzas. Cuando estamos en el mundo de las finanzas, queremos que todo el mundo está enterado y sobre todo interesadísimo en esto. Eso es falso, eso no es así. La gente está interesada en cualquier tipo de cosas, una de ellas, por cierto, sobrevivir. Pero si el tema no es sobrevivir, creo que hay otras cosas mucho más atractivas allá afuera que estar pensando en finanzas. Claro, los que siempre hemos estado en este ajo, en este mundo, creemos eso. No es así. Los raros, los extraños, los diferentes somos nosotros. Y bajo esa premisa tenemos que hacer construcciones mercadológicas de economía conductual y de transmisión de información por el bien de la población, para obtener rentabilidad social desde la perspectiva del Estado, desde la perspectiva del mundo de los negocios, de los grupos financieros. Es la construcción de modelos de inclusión con salud financiera para generar rentabilidad. Ese es lo que yo veo en esta experiencia que he tenido en Conducet. Esa información transparente, cercana, eficaz, debe llevar al usuario a empoderarlo. ¿Qué significa empoderar al usuario? Que tenga la información suficiente, completa, transparente, entendible para que tome decisiones y que descubra que un banco azul, uno rojo, uno verde, como son los colores que se utilizan mayoritariamente en este país y en el mundo, pues ¿cuál es el que le conviene? O si le conviene otra opción diferente a la banca tradicional. Nosotros creamos un esfuerzo que se llama Revisa, Compara y Decide. Y lo que tratamos es de dar esa información lo suficientemente clara y entendible para elementos mínimos de decisión. Creemos que debe haber transparencia luego entonces y deben de respetarse y llevar a cabo las mejores, sanas y más sanas prácticas de mercado. Es importantísimo que no existan cláusulas abusivas, que no exista algo que no sea lo que el usuario está imaginando, creyendo o entendiendo. Sé que es difícil, complicado, pero nunca hemos tenido como ahora la posibilidad de construir mejor bases de datos y poderlas utilizar en enormes cantidades y de manera muy rápida. Nunca en la historia de la humanidad. Podemos hacer cosas que hace apenas 10 años hubieran parecido de ciencia ficción. Atender dudas y quejas. No hay modelo que resista de negocios, financiero o no, si no se da un seguimiento estricto, puntual y cumplido de las dudas y sobre todo de las quejas que existen. O sea, esa es una de las partes que no se deben descuidar. Nosotros atendemos un universo del 1.5% de las quejas que se reciben en la banca en México llegan a Conducet. ¿Qué significa esto? Que de cada 100 quejas que entran a un banco por alguna vía o canal, nosotros atendemos 1.5, o sea, menos de 2 quejas de 100 quejas. En el sector asegurador atendemos 5 de cada 10, 500 de cada 1000. Y en Afores, 6 de cada 10. Claro, los modelos son diferentes. En la banca existe muchas cuentas y sobre todo altísima transaccionabilidad. Allá no. En el sector asegurador a veces la única transacción es la compra y la posterior pago cada año de la renovación y en el mejor de los casos, sería lo ideal, ni siquiera llega a existir un siniestro. Pero bueno, les doy ese dato en cuanto a la importancia de atender dudas y quejas y en la medida de lo posible que nadie llegue con nosotros. Nosotros vamos a tener el 19 de octubre la inauguración de la 15ª edición de la Semana Nacional de Educación Financiera. Va a ser ya no totalmente remota, va a ser híbrida, vamos a tener más de 100 eventos presenciales. Comparados con los que hacíamos hace 3 años antes de la pandemia, son muy pocos, comparado con el 2020 que no tuvimos ninguno y el 2021 que tuvimos uno, son muchos. La Semana Nacional de Educación Financiera es un mecanismo eficaz, potente, tiene un límite serio porque, aunque su nombre dice que dura una semana, en realidad dura 2, pero finalmente son 2 semanas en 52 que tiene el año. La semana se ha potencializado básicamente porque hemos construido alianzas, esa es la clave, y ya estoy cerca de terminar, no se apuren. La clave de este tema de la educación financiera son las alianzas. La Semana Nacional de Educación Financiera se ha potencializado por la alianza con el gremio, con la Asociación de Bancos de México, con la AMIS, pero también se ha potencializado sobre todo porque ha habido una potente alianza con otros actores, los gremios y las instituciones financieras en primer término, y por supuesto con instituciones de educación pública media, superior y superior del mundo, del ámbito privado y público. Hemos llegado a más de 250,000 jóvenes en su mayoría. Y aquí hay otra buena noticia, la participación de las mujeres ha crecido exponencialmente de manera muy significativa, porque hay una intuición certera en las mujeres. La libertad financiera es parte de la construcción de su libertad personal. La libertad financiera, el manejo de las finanzas personales, libera a las mujeres de relaciones tóxicas personales y laborales. No todas las mujeres lo tienen claro, pero hay muchísimas que tienen una intuición certera que dicen que por ahí es. Acabamos de terminar el diplomado de educación financiera. La inscripción al diplomado de educación financiera generación 42, tuvimos 47,000 personas inscritas, el 57% son mujeres. Y en el anterior, que tuvimos más de 60,000 inscritos, el 60% fueron mujeres. Es una magnífica, excelente noticia. Concluyo diciendo que esta Semana Nacional de Educación Financiera va a ser muy importante. Vamos a tenemos como meta 2 millones de impactos, sí los vamos a hacer, sí los vamos a lograr. Tenemos una alianza, gremios, instituciones financieras, instituciones de educación superior pública y privada. Tenemos una alianza con la Secretaría de Relaciones Exteriores, vamos a llegar a más de 50, a través de 50 consulados vamos a llegar a más de 250,000 paisanos, la mayoría en Estados Unidos y Canadá, pero también en otros países. Entonces, concluyo diciendo, en el asunto de la educación financiera, creo que la clave es la construcción de alianzas. Y estoy aquí por esa razón, porque un aliado importante, fundamental, asertivo y constructivo, que en la práctica, no en el discurso, está haciendo cosas, es BBVA. Es la alianza con todas y con todos. La alianza con las instituciones del sector público y privado, la que nos va a permitir que el conocimiento mínimo necesario que las mexicanas, los mexicanos deben tener en materia de educación financiera, les permita tener la posibilidad de construir sueños, de imaginarse de otra manera, pero sobre todo vivir en el día con día de otra forma, liberados de la angustia del día con día, liberados de cómo le voy a hacer si no puedo ya no terminar la quincena, terminar la semana. Ese es el asunto, de quitar esa imagen equivocada que existe en algunas o algunos mexicanos de que el dinero es algo sucio, que es algo que no tiene que ver con la vida misma, con la plenitud. Hay una frase que se le atribuye en México a María Félix que dice: el dinero no es la felicidad, pero quita los nervios, ¿no? Te tranquiliza. Es totalmente y absolutamente cierto. Y en el imaginario colectivo tenemos que avanzar y construir esto de manera diferente y hacer que las finanzas las finanzas personales sean parte de la vida de nosotros, que entendamos que son asuntos que tenemos que saber y crecer. Hay 3 asuntos inevitables en esta vida: la muerte, las finanzas y los impuestos. Así que más vale que de las 3 sepamos un poco. Muchísimas gracias a Eduardo, a su equipo, a BBVA por esta invitación, por esta posibilidad, por este espacio de hablar en algo que nosotros creemos, que ustedes creen y que definitivamente puede mejorar la vida de todas y de todos. Muchas gracias. Éxito.
Agradecemos al presidente de la CONDUCEF su mensaje y cuente con BBVA para la próxima Semana Nacional de Educación Financiera. Vamos a continuar con nuestro programa. A continuación, después del mensaje de apertura, comenzaremos con la primera ponencia, los retos de la inclusión financiera. Vamos a tener a distancia a Dorothy Singer. economista senior para Europa y Asia Central del Banco Mundial, quien nos acompaña, como ya lo mencionaba, a través de video. A partir de este momento, la mayoría de las ponencias serán en inglés, por lo que aquellas personas que requieran puedan hacer uso del servicio de traducción simultánea y quienes nos ven a través del streaming en la versión en español podrán seguir la charla. Dorothy Singer es economista en el equipo de investigación de finanzas y sector privado del Grupo de Investigación de Desarrollo del Banco Mundial. Su investigación se centra en el acceso al financiamiento, la mediación de la inclusión financiera, el Global Findex, y el papel de las instituciones financieras internacionales. Se unió al Banco Mundial en 2009 y tiene un doctorado en economía de la Universidad de Tilburg en Países Bajos. Dorothy, it's a pleasure to have you in our summit.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I'm very excited to join you today. Unfortunately, only via video connection. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. But I'm excited to share with you some of the highlights from the Global Findex Database 2021. It's a report we launched earlier this year in June. And we have a lot of data that we collect, but unfortunately, I have very little time, so I'll focus on some highlights I'll share with you. But before I start, I think many of you in the audience are probably familiar with the Global Findex database. But for those of you who may not, the Global Findex database was launched in 2011 by the World Bank and is today the world's most comprehensive database on how adults around the world save, borrow, make payments, and manage financial risk. The data is based on national representative surveys and covers about 140 countries around the world. Following 2011, the data was also collected in 2014, 2017, and we were supposed to collect data in 2020. Unfortunately, the pandemic prevented us from doing so, but we collected the data in 2021, and I'm here to share the results from that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so before I show you some of the data we have, I want to share three big thematic messages we see coming out of the data. The first one is on technology-enabled accounts, and there we see that digital financial services have really catalyzed account usage around receiving and making payments, saving and storing money, and borrowing. We also see that mobile money in sub-Saharan Africa and some Asian countries has really driven growth in account ownership, as well as payments and savings. On gender, again, given that this is data we collect from the perspective of a user, we can say something about who uses financial services. And there we see that in developing economies, the gender gap across access to financial services and usage remains, but the gap has significantly narrowed over the years. And finally, given that we collected the data during the age of COVID, we see that in some economies, the pandemic has really accelerated the use of digital payments. Next. So overall, we see that financial inclusion continues to be on the rise globally. We measure financial inclusion by account ownership of adults. And so you see that account ownership varies widely across the world. Among the 123 countries we surveyed in 2020, account ownership ranges from 6% in South Sudan to being universal in high-income economies. You also see that Mexico here on the map is one of the countries that is gray and has some white stripes. And that's because of the pandemic. Our surveys faced some restrictions in where they could go and collect the data. Unfortunately, Mexico was one of the countries where we weren't able to collect data, but we're currently in the field in Mexico, as well as 16 other countries around the world, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, where we're collecting additional data, which we will release in 2023. And we hope we can share the data, especially around Mexico with you sometime next year. Next. Looking at trends in financial inclusion over time, we see that global account ownership has increased from 51% to 76% between 2011 and 2021. Most of this growth has, not surprisingly, been driven by the growth in developing economies. Next. We also see that the growth in account ownership was more distributed between 2017 and 2021 than between 2014 and 2017. So while we've seen a similar rate of growth, as you may recall from the previous screen, we've really seen the growth being more distributed. When we look at growth in account ownership by region, we see that in Latin America and the Caribbean, account ownership grew by 18 percentage points, which is great news after many years of very sluggish growth. Much progress has been made. This contrasts to 2014 to 2017, when much of the growth that we've seen globally was driven by South Asia, and there particularly by India. And I should maybe here note that all our regional as well as income aggregates are population weighted, so larger countries have, of course, a larger weight. Next. When we look at individual countries, we see that account ownership has approached 80% in most large economies by 2021. Account ownership and how countries have gotten there, of course, varies. In India, much of the push in terms of account ownership came through the government's programs of JDY accounts, whereas in Kenya, for example, mobile money has played a big role. Next. And mobile money has not played only an important role in Kenya, but it has really become an important enabler of financial inclusion across sub-Saharan Africa. So, here you see that over time, between 2014, when we first collected this data, to 2021, mobile money account ownership has not only spread across the continent, but also significantly increased. Today, 55% of adults in sub-Saharan Africa have an account, including 33% who have a mobile money account. Next. We also see that thanks in part to growth in account ownership, account access gaps have narrowed overall, but it should be said, not everywhere and not for everyone. So let me show you here the numbers for gender. We obviously have data also by income, by age, by education, by labor force participation. But when we look at gender in particular, we see that the gender gap in account ownership in developing economies is today 6 percentage points, which is still a gap, but it's been an improvement because it represents a decrease from 9 percentage points after many years of remaining unchanged. Next. And so while much progress has been made, we should also note that 1.4 billion adults around the world remain unbanked. Now, we asked them about reasons why they don't have an account, and lack of money, among other reasons, is often the most commonly cited barrier for not having a financial institution account. Next. So access to accounts or having an account is, of course, the first important step towards financial inclusion. But what we know really matters is whether people use their account. And to that point, the Global Findex database collects lots of different data. And today I want to really focus on the payments data we collect. We also have data on savings and borrowing, which I'm not going to have time to go into detail. So on digital payments, we see that the share of adults making or receiving digital payments in developing economies grew from 57% to 57% in 2021, up from 35% in 2014. Now, this number of making or receiving digital payments includes a lot of different types of transactions. So it includes using a mobile phone, a debit or a credit card, or a mobile money account to make a payment from an account, receiving a wage payment a government transfer or pension payment, a payment for the sale of agricultural goods into an account, or sending or receiving domestic remittances from an account, as well as using the internet to pay bills or buy something online. So, it's our aggregate measure, and I'm going to show you one important component of that, which we collected for the first time this year, which is merchant payments. Next. So here we see we collected this data for the first time in this time around on merchant payments. So this is the idea of asking whether people, how people made a merchant payments. Did they pay in cash or did they use a digital payment? So the figure you see here, the total length of the bar is people who have an account. And then the two colored bars together are those who made a digital merchant payment. The dark blue part are those who, for the first time, made a digital merchant payment using a card or a mobile phone. And so here, as you can see, there's quite a few adults around the world, in particular in developing countries, excluding China. We see that 8% of adults around the world made their first digital merchant payment during COVID. And that number was even higher in many economies in Latin America. So on average, in the region, 14% of adults made their first digital payment during COVID, perhaps spurred by social distancing and concerns about hygiene during the height of the pandemic. We also see that Brazil, Argentina here, we see that close to that number was even higher, and we see that close to 20% of adults made a first digital merchant payment during COVID. Next. Overall, we see that receiving a digital payment can really be a catalyst for the use of accounts. So when we look at developing economies, we see that 36% of adults receive a digital payment into an account. And we can break out what type of payment they receive. And then, and as you can see in the figure, about half of them receive a wage payment. And then we can also look at what kind of payments or transactions they make from their account. And so we see that, almost all make a digital payment. People use it to store money in their account. They use it for saving and for borrowing. And overall, we see that the use of accounts for these kind of transactions is much higher than people who don't receive a digital payment. Next. So switching gears slightly, I also wanted to show you this figure on financial resilience. This is data we collect asking adults around the world whether they could come up with emergency money equivalent to about 5% of GNI per capita. And if they can, what are their sources? So in developing economies, we really see that social networks and work are the most common sources of emergency money. And so developing economies, as you see on the right-hand side of the screen here, 55% of adults say it's somewhat or not difficult at all to come up with the money, which is the teal color of the bar. But you can also see that there's a significant chunk of people who say, I could maybe come up with the money, but it would be very difficult. So that's the yellow part of the bar. Now, contrast that to what we see in high-income countries, where the main source of emergency funds is actually savings. And looking at the different sources of emergency funds, we see that savings, both in high-income countries, but also in developing countries, is actually, a very safe source of emergency funding because it always seems to be available. Whereas family and friends, as well as work, we see a large share there of adults saying, maybe I could come up with the money, maybe family could give me money, but it's actually very unlikely that they would do so. So next. So let me conclude here by saying that financial sector transformations can really encourage account ownership and use. So, over the 10 years that we've been collecting the data, we've seen that, the transition from physical branches to agent and mobile technology, for example, has really expanded account use. We see that the digitization of payments, be that wage payments or bill payments, has really increased use of accounts. We also see with merchant payments, great adoption during COVID, for example. I guess an open question is whether those levels will remain as high as they are, but just a new host of services that are much easier to use thanks to technology. So let me next. So let me stop here and say thank you. Also hope that you will visit our website to take a look at our report and explore all the data we have. As I mentioned, all this rich set of results we have that was just not possible to fit in this short presentation here. So thank you.
Thank you for your keynote, Dorothy. Such interesting findings. Para profundizar sobre estos retos en la inclusión financiera y la interesante información que nos compartió Dorothy, quiero invitar al panel a Ana Victoria García, fundadora de Victoria 147, a Mayada El Sohbi, directora general del Center for Financial Inclusion Adacción, y como moderador a Hugo Nájera, director general de Soluciones al Cliente de BBVA México. Ana Victoria García es fundadora de Victoria 147, una asociación enfocada exclusivamente a las mujeres que comenzó en 2012. Es emprendedora, escritora y conferencista, así como promotora del talento femenino. Mayada El Sohbi es directora del Centro para la Inclusión Financiera desde 2019, donde lidera programas de inclusión financiera. Fue líder de estrategia, investigación y desarrollo para el Consultative Group to Assist the Poor y es experta en servicios financieros, inclusión financiera y consultoría. Y por parte del banco, siempre es un gusto presentar a Hugo Nájera, responsable de la evolución y desarrollo de la propuesta de valor para todos nuestros clientes. Es experto en el desarrollo de soluciones digitales y es promotor de la transformación disruptiva en la industria financiera. Un aplauso para todos ellos y adelante con el panel.
Muchas gracias. We'll switch to English. And first of all, welcome, Victoria.
Thank you.
Ana Victoria, Mayada. It's a pleasure to have you here in this Edufin Summit, especially in this panel talking about financial inclusion. I hope that our conversation helps companies, institutions, banks, government, even ourselves to get a more inclusive society. First of all, if you can share with us your experience, introduce a little bit about yourself and your experience about related with the financial inclusion. Started with you, Ana.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And well, I'm Ana Victoria Garcia. I founded Victoria 147 10 years ago, which is a company that develops enterprises, women and female entrepreneurs looking for equality. We build bridges in order to close the gender gap. And we focused on two game changers. In one hand, women who are part of our business academy, and in the other hand, big companies that are truly engaged with making a positive change and trust in us and find a good ally in us to achieve the SDGs and do it together. One of the most things I love to do is writing. So I published my book called Ellas. And something I also love to do is my podcast, Más Cabrona que Bonita. And I had the opportunity to be part of Shark Tank the first woman in the panel with 31 years old. I recently moved to New York, and I think this is me.
Thank you, Ana Victoria. Mayada, please.
It's really wonderful to meet you.
You too.
So my name is Mayada El-Zagbi, and I'm with the Center for Financial Inclusion, which is a think tank that was created by Acción. I think many of you know Acción. It's a large nonprofit that actually started in Latin America and has a long history of advancing inclusive finance for people who were previously unbanked. And they created CFI in 2008 to really solve some of the problems that we just heard about a little while ago related to consumer protection. This was after the financial crisis. There was a lot of stories around over-indebtedness. There were, and CFI was created to really help solve some of these issues. So what we do is we prioritize research in areas where we believe we need more evidence to support the digital economy, to support inclusive finance, and to support low-income people to make better decisions. So that's CFI. I myself came to CFI 3 years ago. I've been in inclusive finance for a long time, something like 20 plus years. I've worked in many parts of the world, Central and Eastern Europe, the Middle East, various other regions. I know Latin America least, so I'm sorry, but I will try to bring some information on Latin America in this conversation.
Thank you, Mayada, to be with us. I will start with you in this conversation with a first question is about if you are seeing trends, special trends around the gender gap that should concern us or a possibility to close that gender gap.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we saw from Dorothy that the high level is good, right? Across the globe, there was almost 10 years of no budging in the gender gap. And just in 2021, we finally started to see a decline. So that's at the global level. However, there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of nuance when you dig deep. So I'll talk a little bit about that nuance, and I'll talk a little bit about MSMEs, micro and small enterprises also. So at the global level, a lot of what the big trend is driven by India. It's literally one country has had they've zeroed the gender gap in India. And a lot of it has to do with what the country did, which is, they created this national ID called Aadhaar. They created, it's called UPI, real-time payment interface, which made it much easier for people to transact. And these two things, as well as they've funded a lot of organizations to help women actually open accounts. These are the things that have really helped India eliminate the gender gap. The problem with India is if you looked at the usage data, if you look closely, it's still a major problem for women in India. So people have an account, but that account is empty and it is not used. So that there's still a challenge there. But there's other countries who have had big leaps that I just wanted to mention. Some of them kind of, you wouldn't expect. Saudi Arabia had, it was notorious. It used to have one of the highest gender gaps in the world. It was at 57% gender gap. It has had a pretty big decline. It's still very high. It's around 18% now, but a pretty massive decline. And then most of the countries that have had historically pretty bad gender gap have been in South Asia and the Middle East. And these countries have all started to see a decline. So that's at the global level. Latin America has had a little bit of an improvement, but not is this better? Not significant. And then you've actually seen, so sub-Saharan Africa is an interesting region where mobile money has been the driving story of, as Dorothy mentioned. However, the gender gap in sub-Saharan Africa has increased. And what does that tell you? That tells you more men are using mobile money than women. So it's still, this is a story where the digital story is not helping women catch up. So there's more that needs to be done there. There's two things that just came out. The GSMA, which is the Association of the Mobile Network Operators, just came out with a report. It's called the Mobile Gender Report. And they highlight two things that are actually very concerning. So over the last decade, we've seen mobile internet, the gap between men and women, decreasing. We've also seen smartphone ownership decreasing. So more women accessing smartphones, more women accessing the internet through their phone. It's stalled. So both of these things have now the gap has started to increase. So what does that tell us? It's a little bit of a concern for the future. So COVID, although there was a very rapid digital, transactions and digital uptake, it really hasn't happened for everybody equally. There is still a group of people who have not been able to partake. And the stalling means that these are the folks that are the hardest to reach, right? So we at CFI do a lot of research, and we've done research with micro and small enterprises over COVID. We did 6 rounds of data collection for about a year and a half during COVID to try to see what's been happening with micro and small enterprises. And here we also see something interesting. Digital adoption between men and women, there wasn't a big gap. However, women's businesses did not recover from the pandemic. Actually, women's businesses have been significantly hit in terms of revenue, in terms of they've had to reduce their employees. And when you ask, we did focus groups to ask why. I have a few things that I want to read for you. Some said it was discrimination. When they were trying to engage with a supplier, for example, or they were trying to get, credit to help finance their business, they were struggling during the pandemic. The other is care responsibilities. So many women had to pull out of their business to support their family, children, and so on during COVID. And so here we have one woman in Bolivia who said, if you work, it is to cover the needs at home. So for her, the business was just to cover the expenses of the household. In Colombia, we had a woman say, work time was reduced a lot because the children's virtual classes got us busy. There was always something. We always had to leave work tasks aside to explain to them. We work with another organization called FAI, linked to NYU, and they've been doing diaries, another kind of research. And they're working with mostly male-owned, slightly larger firms. And they find the opposite. Those businesses are pulling from the family and investing in the business. They're making sure that the business does not get affected under COVID. So it's really interesting to see these kinds of trends happening. So I'll stop here.
Yes, thank you so much. Still with the same topic, Ana Victoria, from your point of view, what's the key so more and more women can be included in the financial system?
Well, first of all, we all need to have a deep understanding of the women's behavior, to know their real needs, and also to know the critical moments where women need access to financial solutions. Although there is data available, we have to use it right in order to design a good go-to-market strategy and in order to reach the right people at the right moment, in the right place, with the right product. Second of all, I would say that walking women through every step is necessary. Like training them to know more about finance and the use of money in order to help them to make better financial decisions. And finally, we must go beyond in order to understand what are the cultural or social reasons that are causing this gap. For example, gender roles in society, or lack of financial independence, or lack of knowledge, or fear. After working with more than 15,000 women in Victoria 147, we realized that we have to focus on 3 things to keep moving and generate growth in women. Education and training, access to a community, and to help them make better financial decisions. So we need to understand that this transformational change is a marathon, not a sprint. But if we want to accelerate this process, we have to build more partnerships in this ecosystem.
Thank you, Ana Victoria. And come back with you, Mayada. Could you share us a little bit more about the digital payments, digital inclusion as part of these trends that help many countries to close this gap?
Okay, well, absolutely. So let's start with the MSME studies that I was just referencing. So I said that the gap between men and women, we didn't really see such a big difference in terms of digital adoption. We saw that at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a big burst. A lot of small firms started to transact digitally or sell, market their products digitally. But what we saw is that this wasn't sustained throughout the pandemic. And actually, recently, we've seen a big surge in cash, which is interesting. So something went wrong. And again, I want to reference back to the conversation that we just heard about. If your first experience with a digital product or kind of a transaction isn't positive, it's highly unlikely you will continue, right? And so, MSMEs decided to go back to using cash, even though the data does show that if they sustained using digital tools, if they continued to sell online, transact online, their resilience to COVID was better. We did see a strong correlation between those using digital tools and resilience of the firm. So it does tell us that we do need to help firms make that transition. We need to help them digitally adopt. I wanted to, again, go back to our focus groups. I want to give you a story of one customer who told us what's the benefit of digital, right? So this person said they would have customers ordering, and then they wouldn't show up to pick up the product, or they would give them the wrong address. So they decided to switch to mobile money and require a deposit before they would start, make the transaction. And after that, they started to see significant improvement and losing less money. So we know that digital adoption has many, many benefits for small businesses. But what we did see is there's these two groups of businesses. There are those, what we call it low stakes digital adoption and high stakes digital adoption. The low stakes digital adoption is when you go on Facebook, contact people, show your products, have a WhatsApp group, and that a lot of small businesses seem to do, and they don't struggle with that. Once you start to deal with the financial transaction piece, that's where there is resistance. And some of the things that we heard were things around fear of fraud. So there were stories around fraud. There were stories around paying taxes. There were stories around competition. If I make my price known and it's publicly visible on an e-commerce platform, I'm going to get competition from other businesses. I want to keep my price, hidden, and I'll do that with the buyer directly on WhatsApp. So it's interesting to see these again, all the nuance, and so we have to think about how do we resolve these things for different segments of firms or people.
And financial education, in that sense, financial education should be more, go beyond the traditional financial education about credit cards or how to use an account. You should understand how the digital world works in the financial system. It's very important to put more and more money in these programs, because the digitization is the key for many things, even just for the knowledge, the people to know how to do something. And I think that the recommendations of Dorothy was she did this recommendation is you should have digital payments as part of the key, as a key to digital inclusion.
Yeah, no, I would just say that we probably, for some of these businesses who maybe don't understand the issues around taxation, or they don't understand, there's going to have to be some incentives, some kind of mechanism to help them make that transition. So I agree that it will take a little bit more effort, and I think that there's other things, there's lots of things that people are testing, gamification, incentives, you get a lower interest rate, a few things like that to try to incentivize small firms to partake in the digital economy. I think we need to do more.
Well, let's talk about impact. You start with that. Could you tell us, Ana Victoria, what's the impact to to get to still with this slowly way to include women in the financial system?
Well, I'm going to talk about what we're losing. I think we've lost a lot of value in a way, and value has been lost from not being able to access women's insight to improve the financial system. Also, we've lost economic growth for sure. And we've created a legacy of inequality of opportunities. And as a result, we have, or we can see, a greater number of informal businesses. And here's some data interesting about the great opportunities we have among women. In Mexico, only 1 in 10 women saves or set aside money in a financial institution. It's 12%. Only 1 in 10 women use the internet to manage the bank accounts. Only 2 out of 10 women have access to a formal financial institution. It's 23%. Pretty low. So this is mainly due to or lack of information, or other ways to keep their assets, or not having enough funds, or long distance, time constraints, insecurity, or bad services from financial institutions. So, however, we cannot measure the total impact we're losing, but because there's no a way to measure the cost opportunity of the what ifs, no? But we've lost a lot in the way, and now it's on us to stop that trend.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Mayada, what's the impact of digital adoption in financial services of vulnerable people, especially women?
Yeah, so now I'm going to rely on the rigorous impact evidence and actually say that there's very, very solid, very substantial, nothing that I could find in Latin America, hopefully that's coming, but in Africa and in South Asia, there's very, very compelling evidence of what happens to people when they start to use in mobile money or other forms of digital transactions. We've seen studies that show that, the issue around reduction of stress, for sure, an ability during a shock to be able to access money from family and friends that are very, very far away, so remittances always increase, and help people not reduce food intake. So during crises, we see people being able to continue to consume like they did before, and that is enabled by digital channels. So they're able to, get funds from other sources. We've seen, we've seen it in rural areas. We've seen it reduce poverty. Actual reduction of poverty in a couple of places in Bangladesh and in Kenya. We have evidence that says in the long run, people who are having access to digital channels, that actually reduces their poverty over time. So these are substantial benefits that we hope and we think translate to other parts of the world. And so we definitely want to see this, want to see more research to document that, but we definitely think that there is benefits for everyone.
Benefits and a great impact. And Victoria, what's the great challenge for the banks in this trying to understand what we need to do?
Well, I wrote down a few. I think striking the right balance between competition and regulation. The processes, the internal processes you have that reduces flexibility. Also, I think the capacity to evaluate individual cases and validate their feasibility, not analyze as a group, but as an individual. And I think there's a mismatch between the products and the group's necessity. And also, I think there's a huge opportunity to the right use of data to improve these products and to have the right strategy, go to the market strategy to the right people. I think that would be it.
The use of the data is a very important key because, if you use just the data in the way that you are getting, it's probably you will have this kind of, ¿cómo se dice sesgos? Bias. A bias because the behavior that we have now identifying in our databases, it's different than the thing that we want to build. It's very dangerous, but it's probably you have a very important key that is using the data in the right way to get a better possibilities to include women and vulnerable people in the financial system.
So we're actually doing research on this issue, bias, algorithmic bias, which is, and there are techniques that firms can do to recognizing that there might be bias in the historical data. Yeah. So a woman who doesn't have a phone is not going to have the same kinds of transaction history as a man who might have a phone, right? But there are ways to correct the algorithm.
Exactly.
And so we do think that there's lots of opportunity to improve the way these algorithms are trained.
Exactly. And Maya, what are the recommendations you may have for the private sector, governments, banks, institutions, and other stakeholders regarding digital adoption and digital financial services?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already been said. I think it came up a lot yesterday. The issue of trust. It is such an important issue. And I think some of the work that BBVA is doing, some of the work that other organizations are doing is trying to ensure that customers trust the financial institution. I think it's very important. And I do think financial education is part of that trust building. But it means also providing more information, helping customers overcome challenges. And I think that we heard earlier around, let's just say you make a mistake, you're sending money to somebody and you make a mistake, you're not a rich person, losing that money can be a big crisis for you. Helping people recover or figure out how to solve these things is really key to helping them stay on and continue to use. So we call it recourse. There has to be recourse for someone who makes a little mistake. So these are the things that I think are critical. They're part of what we call, it's part of consumer protection, I think. It's just making sure that people have a safe experience when they're transacting digitally. And once they do, they will over time build up trust and continue to use it. I do think, when we started talking, I mentioned this issue of, in some regions, you started to see, a stalling of women not getting phones or not getting the internet. So there is a segment of people, and this is where the norms issue that you mentioned, there is a segment of people that will require more than the basic. We'll have to be thinking a little bit out of the box of how do we address these cultural barriers that are going to, where the husband or the father or whoever is not going to want his daughter to have the internet, and we have to think about how do we address those issues. And this is where the stakeholder, the collaboration, the partnerships, this is where the government has a role, this is where the nonprofit sector has a role, and the private sector has a role to help address some of these societal, bottlenecks to help everybody participate in the digital economy.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Ana Victoria.
Thank you.
To share with us all your experience and your thoughts about financial inclusion. I hope that this conversation helps many people to make better decisions to get a more inclusive society. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Muchas gracias a Ana Victoria, a Mayada y a Hugo por tan interesante panel. Sin lugar a dudas, son grandes aportaciones que nos hacen pensar en las oportunidades que tenemos las diferentes instituciones para impulsar la inclusión financiera. Siguiendo con nuestra agenda, vamos a dar inicio al segundo panel del día, que lleva por título La revolución de los datos al servicio de las capacidades financieras. Invito a pasar a Luz Gómez, vicepresidenta de Impacto Social Latinoamérica y Caribe del Centro para el Crecimiento Inclusivo de Mastercard, a Raúl Navas Salazar, especialista de servicios digitales para instituciones financieras en IFC, y a Carlos Serrano Herrera, economista en jefe de BBVA México, aquí al escenario. Luz cuenta con una experiencia de más de 15 años trabajando en el sector público y privado. Se desempeñó como directora de investigación en la Fundación Knight. Ha realizado diversas investigaciones y evaluaciones de programas y productos financieros, especialmente dentro del programa de oportunidades económicas en el Aspen Institute. Raúl es responsable de la implementación de proyectos de servicios financieros digitales bajo el paraguas del programa acelerador IFC Digilab. Ha participado liderando importantes proyectos de transformación digital y en el desarrollo de nuevos negocios para empresas y negocios tradicionales. Y como moderador, siempre es un gusto presentar a Carlos Serrano. Cuenta con una maestría y doctorado en economía por la Universidad de California en Berkeley, en donde se especializó en macroeconomía, finanzas internacionales y organización industrial. En el año 2000 obtuvo el Premio Nacional de Investigación Económica en México, otorgado por el Banco Nacional de México, y actualmente lidera el área de estudios económicos de BBVA México, donde se realizan importantes análisis macroeconómicos, sectoriales y migratorios. Adelante con el panel.
Muchas gracias, Sergio. Muy buenos días a todos. Es un placer estar aquí en este panel con Luz y con Raúl, donde queremos hablar acerca del impacto que pueden tener los datos, las tecnologías, la inteligencia artificial como una herramienta para promover tanto una mejor educación financiera como una mayor penetración bancaria, especialmente en países como México y en general en Latinoamérica, donde tenemos problemas importantes de acceso al sistema bancario, problemas importantes de educación financiera. Para darles una idea, México es un país donde tenemos una encuesta muy reciente del INEGI, de la Comisión Nacional Bancaria de Valores, donde solamente el 32% de la población dice tener acceso al crédito bancario. El panorama con los seguros es todavía peor, solamente 21% de la población cuenta con algún tipo de seguro. Entonces tenemos retos importantes tanto en temas de acceso como en temas de uso, así como en temas de educación financiera. Hay también encuestas que nos muestran que los conocimientos, que un porcentaje importante de la población no cuenta con conocimientos mínimos en temas financieros, que es una tasa de interés, cómo se amortiza un crédito, etcétera. Y creemos nosotros en BBVA que las nuevas tecnologías, en particular la inteligencia artificial, el uso de grandes bases de datos y los temas digitales pueden ser una herramienta muy potente para poder primero lograr que más personas accedan al sistema financiero. Tenemos un problema no solamente de falta de acceso a crédito y ahorro, sino que un porcentaje muy importante de la población en general en Latinoamérica accede a productos financieros en el sector informal. Y esto implica pues que tienen que pagar tasas de interés mucho más altas. Cuando ahorran, pues no tienen una protección legal, no tienen acceso a mecanismos como un seguro de depósito. Entonces, nos parece que hay que trabajar para lograr una mayor inclusión financiera, y creemos que la manera de hacerlo es a través de la tecnología. Lo que hemos visto en los últimos años es que la infraestructura física pues tiene limitantes para poder acceder a una parte importante de la población. Aquellos que viven en poblaciones remotas, pues es casi imposible llevarles los servicios de una sucursal tradicional. No es rentable poner una sucursal tradicional, no es viable en muchos casos, pero lo que sí es viable es darles servicios bancarios a través de aplicaciones móviles, sobre todo en un país donde la penetración de los teléfonos móviles es muy amplia. Brevemente, antes de pasar a preguntar, yo quisiera comentar algunas iniciativas pues, que se han tomado en el banco para avanzar en estos temas, ¿no? Primero, hemos trabajado ya de la mano del área de educación financiera con Mauricio Nacer varios experimentos para probar qué tipo de acciones pueden ayudar a los usuarios del sistema financiero a tener mejores conductas. Por ejemplo, hicimos un experimento donde a un colectivo importante de los usuarios que tienen la aplicación móvil, a más de 100,000 les mandamos mensajes de SMS recordando la importancia de ahorrar, y ahí con distintos formatos, y eso nos ha permitido analizar qué forma y qué tipo de mensaje pueden ser efectivos para poder fomentar hábitos como los del ahorro. Entonces, creemos que estas grandes bases de datos que tenemos, junto con la posibilidad de realizar estudios de impacto que tengan validez estadística, nos pueden ayudar a ir determinando cómo podemos ayudar a que los usuarios del sistema financiero tengan una mejor conducta. Otras cosas que hemos hecho, como se mencionaba en el panel anterior, México y en general Latinoamérica son países donde hay problemas muy importantes de seguridad, y como se mencionaba en el panel, alguien que de repente es objeto de algún fraude, por ejemplo, de un robo de identidad, donde pierde una parte importante o todos sus ahorros, es una persona que quizá no quiera ya regresar más al sistema financiero. Entonces, para esto pues, el banco ha trabajado mucho en invertir en tecnologías que reduzcan la posibilidad de que veamos este tipo de fraude. Por ejemplo, reconocimiento facial, reconocimiento de voz, porque creemos que en la medida en que las personas vayan perdiendo el miedo a utilizar tecnologías digitales, pues va a aumentar el uso. Y por cierto, eso es algo que vimos claramente en la pandemia. México era un país muy rezagado en temas de comercio digital, era un país bastante rezagado también en temas de uso de tecnologías bancarias digitales, y en la pandemia, ante la imposibilidad de salir, las personas tuvieron que empezar a hacerlo, y vimos crecimientos explosivos, por ejemplo, en comercio digital, crecimientos del orden del 50% anual, y aquellos que empezaron a usarlo hoy ya lo siguen usando, ¿no? Se ayuda a perder el miedo, y esto lo que nos ayuda o lo que nos indica es que muchas veces lo que se requiere es ayudar a las personas a dar el primer paso para utilizar tecnologías digitales, que pierdan los miedos, y eso nos puede ir ayudando a tener una mayor penetración. Entonces, yo concluiría diciendo que en el banco somos convencidos de que la manera en que podemos aumentar la penetración bancaria es a través de tecnologías digitales, es a través de un mejor uso de los datos, donde podamos aprender qué tipo de políticas, tanto públicas como de las instituciones, son las mejores para que las personas puedan acceder al sistema bancario, y también el mejor uso de los datos para poder tener una mejor medición de riesgos, poder lograr que hoy personas que estén excluidas al crédito podamos medir mejor sus riesgos y acercarnos con ofertas bancarias personalizadas a quien hoy, por falta de conocimiento, por falta de información en los burós de créditos, no podemos acercarnos. Creemos que las tecnologías hoy, y sobre todo las bases de datos que hemos ido recopilando, por ejemplo, tenemos bases de datos muy amplias en el lado pasivo del banco, y eso nos ha permitido dar ofertas de crédito en el lado activo a quienes quizá no tengan récords en los burós de crédito, pero podemos ir construyendo sus historiales de ingreso, y poder ir construyendo y diseñando ofertas de crédito adecuadas para las personas. Entonces, creemos que ese es el camino, y creemos que países como los de Latinoamérica pueden ir aumentando sustancialmente con estas nuevas tecnologías y con la revolución de los datos el acceso a nuevas tecnologías. Con más quisiera pasar, Luz y Raúl, a hacerles algunas preguntas e iniciar la discusión. Primero contigo, Luz. Iniciaré diciendo, pues un problema fundamental en la región, en concreto en México, son los enormes niveles de informalidad, lo cual implica en muchos casos pues, que no hay ahorro. 40% de los adultos en México declaran nunca haber ahorrado. Un número importante dice que solamente ahorra, más o menos el 40%, a través de canales no formales, y como decía, pues esto los deja fuera de protecciones legales, fuera de protecciones de un mecanismo como seguro de depósito. Entonces, yo quisiera preguntar, en tu opinión y con la experiencia que tiene, ¿qué tipo de medidas se pueden tomar y cómo la revolución de los datos podría ayudarnos a aumentar el porcentaje de la población que ahorra a través de medios formales, cómo poder migrar a la población de la informalidad a la formalidad financiera.
Thanks for the question. I think we're doing hybrid on this
Please.
panel.
Exactly, yeah, sure.
That's awesome. Well, just to follow along, thanks for the question, Carlos, on savings. And just to follow along on gender a little bit, because I think thinking about data and disaggregating it is kind of an interesting exercise. So you talked a bit about sort of aggregate data around savings in Mexico. If you look at women in Mexico, they tend to save informally more than men. So again, bringing up issues around insecurity as well, or maybe doing in tandas or in saving circles. And so
Right.
I think looking at it also from a gender perspective is really helpful, just in terms of determining needs around savings and understanding savings behavior. So that's just one point. It really resonates with some of the other panels as well. The second thing I'd say is that we all know the last few years have been really difficult for people. I think what the pandemic laid bare was the lack of resiliency and the lack of savings cushion that people had. Even before the pandemic, one statistic that we would often cite was that 40% of Latin Americans didn't have enough money to withstand some kind of economic shock. So it was already tough before the pandemic, and so I think this issue of developing financial resiliency, developing a savings buffer is ever more important now, hopefully coming out of the pandemic. The theme of the day, of the last couple of days, has been this acceleration of digital financial services. And so to your question is a really good one in terms of how do you catalyze sort of the data that's collected around digital financial services, how do you catalyze that and for really developing products and services that meet the needs of people. One project I wanted to share a bit about that MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth has been working on together with the Inter-American Development Bank Savings Lab is a project with a behavioral science lab called Common Sense. They're based out of Duke University. And we've been working with them here in Latin America so that they could bring the tools of behavioral science to digital platforms in Latin America. So we're partnering with digital platforms in Latin America. But with the goal, the ultimate goal, to increase the financial health of the users of those digital platforms. And what does that mean? The financial health and resilience. It means increasing savings rates. It means increasing insurance adoption. It means increasing expensive debt. And so we're working on this project. And just to kind of bring it to life a little bit, one of the principles of behavioral science is to try to automate savings wherever you can. And so if you think about overcoming some of the behavioral biases that people have around having too much choice and kind of getting into this decision paralysis, or we talked a bit in previous panels around financial stress, and low-income people will oftentimes get caught into this scarcity mindset where you can't think beyond your day-to-day, and savings is sort of thinking a little bit ahead of the curve about what might happen. And so we hope to bring the tools of behavioral science into the digital environment of digital platforms. So just to kind of give you one example, so the IDB has already been doing some of this work in Latin America. They did a project with a ride-sharing platform in Peru, and where they automated savings, takes a portion of a driver's income into savings, and again, all within the digital app. And interestingly, the data showed that after 3 months, 97% of the folks in that intervention, of the drivers in that intervention, were still saving after 3 months. And so I think it shows that, above and beyond access to information about how to save, we also need to think about it from a behavioral perspective, and listen to how to help overcome some of these biases. So that's kind of something that we've been really interested in. We actually have been working with Mercado Libre vis-a-vis this project, and over the last year. But the idea is to gain insights and then share them more broadly with other companies that are providing digital financial services so that they think about the financial health component and the resiliency component because you can't have a successful business without investing in your users and their financial health.
Sounds great, Luz, and I fully agree. We have an issue of financial inclusion and inclusion to the formal financial system, but it's particularly acute with women. In particular, in Mexico, the gender gap is 14%. That means the percentage of adults that save in the formal financial system is low, but it's 14 percentage points lower for women than for men. This is something that we need to work on. And I agree, we need to use the tools of behavioral economics to promote a better use and better conduct on financial products. That's exactly what we are trying to do here at BBVA with all these experiments to try to test what can work better for people to adopt better conduct.
And I look forward to trading war stories on the interventions and sharing.
That would be great. Let me give you just one example. Here at the bank, in principle, we have better educated people here among the staff of the bank. And there's a pension plan in the bank. And some years ago, it was an opt-in plan. Only 30% of the staff saved for their retirement. And we changed that for an opt-out. And now 90% of the people save. So these things work, on behavioral economics work, and we need to push that to the broader population. Raúl, you want to discuss in English or Spanish now that we have an...
I guess it's fine in English.
Okay, so thank you, Raúl. I want to start asking you, you have a lot of experience and a lot of visibility from the IFC and different practices among the region. To ask you, first, what is different now from 10 years ago in terms of what we can do with artificial intelligence, with data? Can you tell us a little bit how things have changed? And if you have identified good practices in some countries that can be adopted in other countries in the region in these areas?
Thank you, Carlos. Well, I guess that talking about the differences, I spot at least two of them. One is that, for example, 10 years ago, we had like a certain infrastructure, TI infrastructure, but it was more like on-premise, meaning that usually the entities maintain their own services, and it was like kind of limited. However, for example, when Amazon launched their e-commerce service, they started to reinvent or invent the cloud. No? So now that we have the cloud, I think that there is somewhat an unlimited capacity of building this kind of data models, and that is a big difference because you are not like constrained by any kind of physical infrastructure. So I think that that's one big difference. You can do more. I mean, there are several complex algorithm models or AI models that need a lot of resources, and you can escalate. I mean, that means that you can be like, for example, a small institution and still have access to computational power. And if you are maybe a big institution, you can have as many computational power as you would have, you know, for example. And also, on the other hand, I think that something that has changed is that, for example, the governance and the management of the data is now more structured. For example, 10 years ago, it could be seen like more a task of an IT department that produced some reports and results, some business insight based on using a tool. But today, I think that there is like a more structured process of having the data and then processing the data, analyzing the data, having insight, and taking decisions. So along with all this process, there is a governance that is overseeing, and of course you need like technical staff, but also you need like management people who interpret the results and who make or propose some decisions. So from a point of view, that's two of the big difference that I see from 2 years ago. It's more of a corporate strategy rather than a technical strategy. And about best practices, well, that's an interesting question because there are several frameworks which talk about data models and the use of data. I know, for example, a donut model, which you can see as an iceberg. In the deeper part, you have like the data as in the data lake and all of the data sources, and then you are like scaling up, like going into an elevator, and you have like structured data, unstructured data, processing, interpreting, and at the very top of the iceberg, you have like the reports that you use like to have some insights and take decisions. So my interpretation is that the best practices should consider all of these stages of the data processing, disregarding if the methodology is called, for example, A or B, but my suggestion is that you should have a methodology or a process, a standardized process, so that you can take advantage of it.
Great, thank you. Quite useful. Going back to you, Luz, another thing that we're interested in is not only promoting better access and use to financial services by the individuals, but also by small businesses, because we have learned that in many cases small businesses also they lack some basic knowledge on financial matters. They sometimes do not have access even to the formal financial system. And what you have been doing with the lab at Duke University is quite fascinating. I don't know if you can tell us a little bit on how do you think also this revolution in data and what you have learned in your work and together with the lab, these new technologies and data, can they help us also for small business owners to make better financial decisions going forward?
Maybe I'll do a little bit of a deep dive on the rural sector, because you and I had a little bit of pre-conversation about the rural sector, and I think, smallholder farmers, kind of, yes, they're kind of MSEs as well. Sometimes at the individual level, or sometimes have workers. I think, and we haven't seen any usage, right, increases in the rural sector, right? I think you discussed a little bit.
Exactly. There's a huge gap in usage between rural and urban centers, no?
Exactly.
It's huge, no?
Exactly. And so, and I think it's probably a focus on two things that we've seen at MasterCard, just in terms of our experience working with smallholders and the process of digitization. One is around the lack of connectivity and digital infrastructure in the last mile.
Right.
And then the other piece, I think, is around product constructs that work for folks in the last mile, really kind of understanding what the needs are in the last mile. And maybe I could kind of bring it to light by just giving a little bit of color through some work that we did in the coffee sector, specifically here in Mexico,
Sure,
and in Colombia too. And I think sheds light on this infrastructure issue, connectivity gaps, as well as the product construct. So we did this program called Café Paga. Yeah, where we worked with a large coffee buyer, one of the largest in the world, and wanted to digitize the payments that this coffee buyer made to its smallholder farmers, these small businesses. And in Mexico, it was really tough in Chiapas, in that area, because of the lack of connectivity, because of the lack of infrastructure in rural agent networks. And so it really didn't allow for us to bring much innovation with respect to the types of digital financial services that we could bring to bear in that project, because you just couldn't make it work with what you had in place. But interestingly, contrasting that to Colombia, and it was a little bit different in Veracruz. I think we had better experience, better connectivity, so it was a nice contrast in Mexico. But if you contrast it to what happened in Colombia, which we launched a pilot, same idea, digitizing payments, coffee buyer to smallholder farmers. But we launched it in the context of the pandemic, and we were able to use an e-wallet because the connectivity was better in this rural part of southern Colombia. And during the pandemic, these smallholder farmers, again, usually family operated, maybe have a few seasonal workers under their belt. They started using this digital wallet not only to receive the payments from the buyer, but also to receive social disbursements if they qualified for it, because a lot of governments did that during the pandemic. They sent remittances to their family members back and forth to Bogota, other urban centers. They paid bills because they couldn't stand in line because the lockdown was very severe in the first couple of months. And so there's these new use cases that developed, and people had to use them in a way during the pandemic. And I think it was an interesting illustration of the functionality. Can you make products that work for people even in that last mile? And so, again, I think it's an illustration of both the infrastructure as well as the infrastructure needed, the connectivity needed, the agent network needed, that you have to invest in for the long term, and a lot of that's been done in certain parts of Colombia, so it's a nice contrast. But also the product construct, BBVA probably has a lot of, experience in this effort in terms of trying to understand, okay, what are the functionalities, what kind of functionalities will work for MSEs, what kind of functionalities might work in a rural setting, and listening to it and evaluating the data, doing the analysis on the data. This fintech that we were working with in Colombia saw some really interesting behavior based on doing the analysis of the data after that pilot. And so I think it sort of follows on some of the questions.
Absolutely, exactly. That's what I was meaning. How can we help SMEs, particularly rural SMEs? Because what we have found here at BBVA is that in these cases, in terms of functionality and product design, sometimes these SMEs, especially in the rural sector, they have even problems with basic cash management. No? They don't know how to plan how much cash they need for the daily transactions, how to store the cash. So we think that providing good technologies for them to receive digital payments is crucial, especially in the rural sector, where it's much more difficult to have this cash management. But I absolutely agree with you. There's an issue with connectivity, last mile connectivity. We need to work together with governments, because if we really want to foster financial inclusion, we need to start with connectivity. And we also have a huge gap in the region in terms of connectivity. We recently made a study. The region is lagging in, of course, the advanced economies in terms of connectivity, but again, you have particular problems. Connectivity is way worse in the rural area, and it's way worse also from a gender perspective. Women, for some reason, use internet less, and that means that women that want to be entrepreneurs, they have more difficulty with this. So that's something that we for sure need to work with together with policymakers in order to surpass this.
And maybe just to follow on that, on the gender issue, what we've seen works with women, and of course it's experimentation, behind experimentation, but is sort of blending tech and touch, right?
Right.
So women, like you said, may not feel comfortable at first, but if they're learning with a peer, there's more likely to be some adoption. So I think just being creative about interventions that could incorporate family members, younger family members are oftentimes really helpful to older family members. And then peers, learning from peers, so that they become comfortable in that digitization process.
Absolutely, because there's, of course, not only a gender issue, but also an age issue. It's middle-aged people have much less access, and I think exactly somewhat like a peer structure will help, because if you see in Mexico, usage by young people is not that bad in comparison with advanced countries. But with middle-aged people, the country is lagging far behind, and I think some of these interventions that you're mentioning can really help in this issue. Raul, another thing that I wanted to ask you is something that IFC has been working is on issues on open finance and possibilities that open finance bring. Can you tell us a little bit about the vision that you have at the IFC and open finance, how open finance can help to improve access and the lives of people?
Sure, Carlos. Well, in IFC, we have been working with regulators as well as with private entities. And it's been very interesting because what we have been doing with them is like the creation of ecosystems. And I think that is an important concept in open finance, but also in data. Because, for example, you have an entity which has sources of data, but the entity doesn't usually share these instances with third parties. So by helping the institutions to provide open APIs, they are allowed like to create new sources of business in the benefit of the client. For example, in Colombia, we have been working with some big institutions, and what they're doing is, like, for example, making alliances with telecommunications companies. And what happens is that the telecommunications company client, into their application, they can request for a credit. And in the end, like, who is the face before the client is the telecommunications company, but with the backup of a banking license and with the backup of the financial entity that is providing all the support, the services, and infrastructure. So in this way, what is happening is that, for example, the entities are allowed to reach new clients and also like provide new sources of services for clients that would not normally approach the entity. This is one example. In the case, for example, of the regulator, we're working with Dominican Republic. They are working on the regulatory draft to officially launch the Open Finance regulation. And what we're doing with them is a series of workshops so that they can understand and they are aligned to this new language. I mean, what is an API? What should an API standard consider? Which can be like the constraints or the responsibilities for third parties, which should be like the client consent process, no? Also in Chile, we're working with them in the process of their open finance regulation. And in Mexico, we have had some approaches. In the end, there is something that has been structured and published. There is some delays, no, that have occurred because of the changes of officers, etc. But we have also been talking and working with them so that we can, in the end, have this system or this ecosystem that allows for open competence and also for third parties to integrate into this financial system, and in the end, the client can benefit from it.
Great. I think you touch a crucial point in this issue. You were saying, well, we're working with some companies, even technology companies, that can provide some services, but with a banking license. And I think that's crucial because at the end of the day, what we want to protect the most is savers. And a banking license means being subject to prudential regulation. And prudential regulation is there to protect savers. So in that sense, we think models that try to grant access quickly through non-banking companies and companies that are not subject to prudential regulation are very risky because if you play and you put at risk the savings of people, that's the worst you can do for financial inclusion. So I fully agree with you in the sense that we need to follow an architecture that respects prudential regulation. Of course, prudential regulation is an evolving issue and we all need to learn more, but the worst we can do is to provide incentives to channel savings of people through schemes that are not regulated, because that can, at the end of the day, can prove a huge regression in terms of financial inclusion, no?
Yeah, I totally agree, Carlos. And for example, taking some best practices in other countries, in UK, for example, there are some insurances that third parties need to pay to a regulator in order to compete into this open finance ecosystem. This means that, for example, if there is a payment initiation solution that a client uses, and then something happens because his or her balance has been washed out, or there are some mistakes in its balance, and an investigation is going on, and in the end, it's concluded that the party for some reason had to do with it, then the third party is responsible to pay the user for whatever has been lost. No? So these kind of frameworks are important in order to protect the user, the consumer, as you're saying, but also to mitigate the risks that are associated with the new way of doing businesses. And this means that it shouldn't be like forbidden, or we shouldn't be afraid of, okay, if there is an open ecosystem, then the frauds will increase, or it is risky for the clients. The risk, it's there, but we need to think proactively how to mitigate it and how to protect the consumer in this new ecosystem.
I fully agree with you, Raul. And Luz, one issue that, now that you were mentioning this issue about the gender gap and how women have less access to finance and less access to technology, something that is paradoxical is we have been looking at the data in Mexico. On the one hand, women have lower access to credit. But on the other hand, women pay better, and their past due loans are lower than with men. Do you think there can be ways to use data to design better products that recognize these facts and, for example, offering products with lower rates for women because they represent a lower risk? Or how can we use data in particular for product design to close that gender gap?
Well, there's been actually some really interesting work that my colleagues on the SME side have been doing around looking at credit performance and disaggregating data and seeing if there's biases in the way they're underwriting because women do pay better.
Yes, they do.
Exactly. So I think it starts with kind of understanding where you are as a financial institution. So we've been working with a couple of financial institutions, I think in Ecuador and another country that I can't recall in Latin America. But I think it starts with understanding the opportunity that women SMEs represent for a financial institution and really getting more granular in terms of credit performance. So I think that's a big kind of common theme of the day. I also think there's interesting things to be done around data. Raul, you're much more of an expert than I. But we've been supporting, for example, an initiative for the past several years called data.org. I recommend that people check it out. They've been doing a lot of great work around how to build more of an infrastructure around data science for social impact. And they've been supporting a number of research initiatives, and one of which I'll highlight, Women's World Banking, which is doing a study in 3 countries, including here in Mexico, trying to look at, is there algorithmic bias against women in terms of accessing credit. And so they're doing a deep dive and kind of understanding what are the opportunities and then the risks in AI modeling in terms of access to credit. So I think it's looking at these opportunities because there's going to be more of this as a trend in terms of using big data, using AI in terms of understanding credit risk. So I think just understanding it with a gender lens and seeing how it could become more of an opportunity and recognizing it and cover those biases, I think is a step in the right direction.
Absolutely, we fully agree with you. We think one instrument to grant more access to credit is better credit screening. At the end of the day, if you don't have good credit screening, you left out good credits out of the system. That's something that we learned here at BBVA. In Mexico, SMEs were basically shut down from credit offers, and basically in the aggregate numbers, SMEs looked quite risky. But the bank decided to start looking at them, and big data can really help you to screen better some credits. And the bank has been able to provide much more credit to SMEs because big data helps you to do a better screening and say, well, not all SMEs have the same risk profile. You can really access the good credit risks with data. So I fully agree with you. The more data that we have, and especially with the artificial intelligence, we can learn to do more and more better and better credit screening. And then at the end of the day means more access, because when credit screening is worse, you always left out good creditors out of the system. and I fully agree with you. It can be done with the gender gap, and here in Mexico, the bank has learned to do that with SMEs with quite a success. The bank began a project to start lending to SMEs right before the pandemic. It continued during the pandemic, and even with a huge contraction of economic activity, data helped the bank to access the good credits, and the credit provision to SMEs has grown significantly with very good credit quality, and that was something that was not probably thinkable 10 years ago without the quality of data that we have today. So I think we need to work more on that direction. No?
Right, and I think, Raul, you mentioned a little bit around sort of alternative data sources that are being tapped into as part of the open banking model.
Sure.
Exactly. For example, in the case of open finance, but also as you were mentioning, Luz, about digital data corridors. And one particular use case was, for example, in the case of Ukraine, some Ukrainian refugees who move into Poland, into Republika Czechia, or into Moldavia, for example. There were no financial information about them. So what we did is to work with the credit bureaus in Ukraine to translate that information into the European financial institutions. So in the end, what we have achieved now is that there are like KYC services, there are credit information services, and there are transactional services. So that helps, of course, to the financial inclusion, but also to mitigate this problem that the refugees are having, that they are fleeing from their country, but they need access to restart a new life in our country. So there was a big gap there, and we have partially covered that with these additional sources of information, with the original sources of information in Ukraine, and with all other sort of data to profile a potential customer, and in this way to enable him or her to start a new life in our country.
That sounds great. Let me touch on something that you were both mentioning. It's about resilience and about the way people deal with shocks, no? In life. The pandemic, of course, was a very extreme example. In Mexico, for example, 90% of the population said that they saw a decline in their incomes and they did not have sufficient savings to cope with that. But beyond the pandemic, what we know is that, especially in developing countries, life events such as a disease, death of a family member can completely change the financial structure of a family. In particular, products like insurance that are ideally suited for these, no? Like medical insurance, life insurance, and so on. They have even lower penetration than credit and savings. So I would like to ask both of you, how can we help people to be more resilient so that if they have an event in their lives, such as a disease or a death of a family member, how can they better cope with that? How can we take advantage of financial products or design tailor-made financial products so that people can be more resilient with this type of life events?
That's the million-dollar question. I think, I think we're taking a stab at it because it's not just an information problem. It's a behavioral problem. So that's why we're kind of taking a stab at looking at some of the behavioral science behind it. What are some of those barriers to adoption of things like insurance that, again, it causes you to think long term, and you're oftentimes more optimistic about how things are probably going to go okay. And so maybe leave that as the last thing on your list, especially if you're barely making it week to week. And so I think there's more to learn in that space in terms of how do you continue to get through barriers to adoption. I do think that with this acceleration to all things digital, there's new offers, there's new products. There's a real, I think, a challenge or risk that people will get left behind in that transition. So I think making sure that we still focus on the most vulnerable and listen to their needs and get their feedback, because we need those feedbacks to develop products that work for those people. So I don't have all the answers today, but those
No,
are-
it's difficult, but I agree with you. We need to learn more from people. That's something that we have been learning with Mauricio in financial education. It's not just about financial education, because sometimes you just design products that are suitable for certain parts of the population, but other parts of the population, they need something different. You need to listen to them and to improve in terms of product design, because it's not only an issue of education, it's an issue of learning about different needs on different segments of the population. So I agree with you. That coupled with behavioral economics, again, there are the same way that we can help people to save more. I think that with behavioral science, we can help them to hire insurance products that are really suitable for them. No? I don't know, Raul, your opinion on this.
Well, no, I agree. That's a tough question, and I think that there are several factors. One of them is, for example, financial education. The other one is how you use technology, like to better know a potential user, and the other one is like what is the value proposal in the product for the client. I was thinking, for example, now that you were mentioning that we are facing tough times, people have needs, and recently in Mexico, for example, there has been a case where some digital apps are offering credits to people, and it sounds maybe unreasonable that, for example, if someone earns like, I don't know, maybe $2,000, and then he receives an offering for 3,000 Mexican pesos credit, I mean, that sounds unreasonable. And it's more unreasonable that this customer has to pay something in advance to get the credit, no? So even though, I mean, people is falling into this fraud, so my perspective, this has to do with some awareness of financial education, but maybe like going deeper into what are like the motives behind of this like action. I mean, of course, there is a need from people that maybe needs access to resources, but on the other hand, maybe they are not that informed, or they need more information about like how to detect a possible fraud, because it gets worse for them in the end, and it's not maybe 100% with financial education, but also with this like kind of awareness of when this user is being inducted to commit an action that can be a fraud. No?
I fully agree. I think we ran out of time. I would just want to conclude with one thought, and is that we here at BBVA, we are also convinced that in order to foster more inclusion, to better design financial products, to protect people, to make them more resilient, we need to adopt policies, both from the government side and also the private sector, to reduce the use of cash. We think that as long as we have an economy that uses heavily cash, like the ones in Latin America, and in particular in Mexico, just to give you an idea, in Mexico, 93% of all transactions take place in cash. And cash is the vehicle for crime, for corruption, for tax evasion, and for financial exclusion. So we think that we need to design policies that gradually, we need to learn from India tried to do this very quickly with bad results, but gradually reduce the offer of cash, substitute that with digital payments, and that will help us in many fronts. So we need to work together with governments, we think, to move in the direction that countries such as China and Sweden are moving, to significantly reduce the use of cash. We think that can really help us also in what we have been working on. I think we ran out of time, and thank you so much we could spend here all day, but these insights, Luz and Raul, that you have shared with us are really interesting and fascinating, and we hope that we can continue to collaborate together. Thank you so much for your time and being here. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Carlos. Muchas gracias, Luz. Muchas gracias, Raúl. Vamos a dar espacio a un receso de 10 minutos. Y antes de pasar al foyer del auditorio, quiero destacar que, en línea con el compromiso sustentable de BBVA, queremos agradecer a la comunidad Chocolate de San Juan Guichovi en Oaxaca, con quienes trabajamos un bordado artesanal que nuestros compañeros de educación financiera tienen en estos momentos en sus playeras. Para los que nos encontramos en el auditorio, los invitamos a tomar un café, y para los que nos siguen a través de la transmisión, nos vemos en 10 minutos. Continuamos con el segundo día de trabajos del Edufin Summit 2022. nuestros asistentes a que pasen ya al auditorio. Estamos por iniciar la segunda parte de este día de trabajo. Estamos de vuelta en Edufin Summit 2022 desde la Ciudad de México. Como ya lo hemos comentado, esta es la quinta edición de esta cumbre en la cual profundizamos sobre la inclusión, la importancia de la inclusión financiera y la educación financiera. Antes de presentar a los participantes del siguiente panel, les queremos mostrar un video sobre lo que BBVA está haciendo para acompañar y formar a sus clientes en materia de sostenibilidad.
El sector bancario es un actor clave en la sostenibilidad, movilizando capital y canalizando fondos para proyectos que proporcionan un futuro mejor para todos. La sostenibilidad es el eje central de nuestra estrategia. En 2007 pusimos en marcha nuestros primeros productos sostenibles y seguimos siendo considerados líderes innovadores en el sector. En función de cada uno de los criterios de ESG, medioambientales, sociales y de buen gobierno, nuestros clientes pueden desarrollar e implementar sus planes de sostenibilidad en línea con su estrategia comercial. Gracias a nuestros equipos de banqueros, con profundos conocimientos, capacidades globales y alta experiencia por sectores, estamos a tu lado en cada paso de tu transición sostenible, entendiendo tus necesidades y ofreciéndote soluciones innovadoras que facilitan el éxito de tu estrategia sostenible. Nuestros expertos están aquí para apoyarte en la integración de la sostenibilidad en tu operativa diaria, así como en tu estrategia a largo plazo, aportando su conocimiento para afrontar retos y oportunidades específicos de tu sector. Ahora es el momento, porque nuestro único futuro está en el planeta en el que vivimos. BBVA. Trabajamos juntos para lograr un futuro más sostenible.
Invito a los ponentes del panel La educación financiera como vía para movilizar capital hacia las finanzas sostenibles a que nos acompañen al escenario. A Pascual Munafó, presidente del Comité de Inversores Minoristas IOSCO, a José Luis Ortega, director de inversión de deuda y multiactivos de BlackRock México, y como moderadora a Lidia del Pozo, directora de programas sociales en BBVA. Bienvenidos todos.
Muchas gracias, Sergio. Y en este panel vamos a continuar en inglés. Así que aquellas personas que necesiten traducción, por favor, que cojan sus headsets. Well, sustainability is a very hot topic. I think more and more people are aware that our decisions are going to make an impact in the next generations and their access to resources. And also that our lifestyle is having an impact in the planet. Sustainable finance is also a very hot topic. We understand that there is an urgent need to channel private and public resources so we can contribute to the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 and ultimately to contribute to the achievement of sustainable development. This is even more pressing after the COVID-19. The current situation is that we really need, again, private and public funds to really solve the problems that we have in the short and the medium term. And the UN has estimated that we need from 5 to 7 trillion US dollar annually to really solve these issues. And this is even more present in developed countries because the need there is from 3.5 trillion to 5 trillion to really solve these problems. And actually, that money is needed mainly for infrastructures, for food security, also for climate change mitigation and adaptation. The good news is that according to Bloomberg, ESG assets under management may surpass 41 trillion in 2022 and over 50 trillion in 2025. And that means 1/3 of the project total assets under management globally. ESG investing is really becoming mainstream, but it doesn't come without challenges. And we are going to talk about that in this panel. Investments need to meet the expectations of the investors and also their priorities, sustainability priorities too. The approach that financial intermediaries do with their investors need to also take into account with the risk appetite of the investors. Asset managers need to be very transparent when they are incorporating the ESG criteria in their investment strategies, and they have to provide also accurate information to their investors. There is an overwhelming amount of information for investors, but it's not consistent, and we do not have standardized frameworks so investors can evaluate and compare sustainable products. And also investors, both retail and corporate investors or institutional, have a limited understanding of what is ESG and which products are available. So that gives us a scenario of very ill-equipped investors to make well-informed investment decisions when choosing sustainable products. In short, we understand that investors need sustainable financial education or financial education for sustainability, to be familiar with new concepts, to acquire knowledge, to have new skills and have new behaviors, and also to be more confident when they participate in these kind of new markets. And to discuss these and other topics, we have two experts in the stage today. I'm going to first introduce Pasquale Munafo, who currently chairs the International Organizations of Securities Commissions Committee 8, the C8 Committee, for retail investors. And he also is a co-chair of the Working Group on Sustainable Finance and Investor Education, and works at the International Relations Office at CONSOB, which is the Italian Securities and Market Regulator. I'm not going to list the current endeavors of Pasquale, but I would like to mention that he has over 20 years experience in financial matters, especially in financial education and financial innovation. And Pasquale also very recently led the creation of a report which was published by IOSCO. I'm going to read this: the Retail Investor Education in the Context of Sustainable Finance Market and Products. It was done under your leadership. And it was very interesting. If you have an opportunity, just read it. And my question for you here is, which are the main challenges that you find when educating investors in sustainable finance?
So first of all, thank you very much, Lindia. Thank you very much also to the organizer for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here in Mexico City, notwithstanding the jet lag, but it's a very pleasure. And also, as you told, I'm wearing the hat of the IOSCO today as the chair of the IOSCO C8 on retail investors, whose mandate is to conduct policy work on investor education and on investor protection. So before just answering your question, just let me give a bit of background. So the project on sustainable finance investor education was carried out by a working group led by CONSOB Italy and the CVM Brazil, and with the support of the IOSCO Secretariat, in particular we work together with the IOSCO Sustainable Finance Task Force, which is in charge at a IOSCO level of the work on sustainable finance, just to avoid any overlaps, to avoid duplications, and also to exploit synergies with them. So the main inputs of the project stemmed from a literature review. That was not an easy job because you know that the references with regard to investor education for sustainable finance are very scarce. And also we had a dialogue with some selected experts, and also we conducted a survey among C8 members to collect useful information about the state of the art in their respective countries, also with regard to regulatory developments, and also with regard to the initiatives undertaken and the initiatives that were about to be launched. And as you can easily guess, the biggest challenge for us has been to move in a sort of unexplored area and try to find a kind of reasonable approach seen from worldwide horizon and considering the differences in the developments about sustainability, on the sensitivity, on the political priorities about sustainability in the different countries. So it was the biggest challenge for us just to work on this. With regard to the challenges for retail investors, so we gather all the information from the sources that I mentioned, and we categorized these challenges, and also complemented with a few suggested approaches for regulators to deal with these challenges. So, for example, one of the challenges is the lack of consistent and comparable information. So this can impact on a retail investor appetite for sustainability-related information. So in this case, regulators, for example, could help investors on how to find the relevant information along the investment chain in their countries. Another challenge is the knowledge gaps, in the sense that retail investors can find difficult to understand some features of the ESG products. So in this case, regulators, not only regulators, but also, of course, other institutions can help with, for example, doing kind of surveys and trying to find this useful information to understand what would be the useful initiatives for them. Another challenge is of course, the risk of greenwashing was mentioned so many times. So in this case, regulators, for example, can help just helping retail investors to better understand the investment product materials. Also, regulators can encourage other market participants to help retail investors to better understand the ESG certifications, the ESG labels, and so on. And another important point for regulators also to encourage, for example, financial advisor, to get acquainted with greenwashing practices. So a sort of training for this. So these are the main challenges, and I would stop here. Thanks.
Let me put my hat on community investment. Do you find the same challenges in the environmental part and in the social part? Do you think there are the same gaps and the same problems of the understanding of standardization?
Yeah, I think that the problem at the moment is this, the fact that you have to consider also that at IOSCO level we are talking about kind of worldwide horizon, so that there are many differences between different countries. So I think that we need a strong effort in terms of harmonization, in terms of standardization, and so financial education, investor education can help also on this.
Great, thank you. So let me turn to the second guest, José Luis Ortega, who is head of fixed income and multi-asset strategies at BlackRock Mexico. And BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager with assets under management nearing 10 trillion, and obviously a clear advocate for sustainability. José Luis is responsible for the management of funds and discretionary mandates, in-depth instruments and multi-assets, and he's also an expert in financial risk and analysis. And we were commenting before, your CEO said a couple of weeks in an interview with our chairman that BlackRock is above all a fiduciary for clients who entrust you the monies so you can invest in companies like Apple, Google, Pfizer, Amazon, and also BBVA. And here's the question. You think training your clients also in transition finance adds value to your fiduciary duty and your advisory duty or advisory role, and how can your clients benefit for such financial or education on transitional finance?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me here. I'm pleasure to be here joining this panel with you, Lydia, and with Pasquale. Then we need to understand that, well, maybe the short answer to your question is yes. We think that it adds a lot of value for our clients and for being a fiduciary, for our fiduciary duty to provide that kind of information towards transitional finance. We have to understand that BlackRock manages around $10 trillion, but that's money from our clients. No, we don't manage any money for ourselves. Everything is for our clients. No, so it's very important for us to realize that around 1/3 of the money that we manage is money that is towards retirement. No? So it's essentially very, very long term. No? So the way that some companies face transition towards sustainability is very important in the long term. You might not take into consideration that approach if you're going to invest maybe for the very short term. But if you're investing for the long term, you have to take into consideration, and it's a very important investment risk, climate risk, and transition risk. Because we are convinced that the way that companies face that approach, and the companies that take a forward-looking approach in that regard, and they are trying to face the challenges in terms of sustainability, in the long term they will have better financial outcomes than the ones that are not taking, like making that homework, and they are not preparing themselves for the future. No? So we know that for our clients, for most of our clients, climate risk is a top concern, and we need to make sure that we help them to realize their investment objectives. So that's why, being stewards of their money, we need to be like very well prepared in terms of facing this transition towards sustainability, and understands the risks, the challenges, and also the opportunities that the companies are facing in this transition, because it's going to have profound effects on the performance of those companies in the portfolios of our clients. So for us, it's really, really important, and for us, we cannot understand now the investment processes without taking into consideration transition risks and ESG, broadly speaking.
Thank you. I think it's very clear, but I would like to go from the abstract to the more concrete things. So I'm going to ask you both for this, which are the activities, the initiatives of financial education that you could find appropriate for investors or from financial intermediaries to the investors. So Pasquale, first what do you think, like in the mind of the regulator, what is advisable, adequate for us financial institutions to provide to our investors?
Yeah, it's not always easy just to suggest something that should be replicated. Just thinking about our report, there we collected some experiences and tools, mainly from regulators, but not only. And we have grouped these in 3 activities. We think that they is related to regulators, but can be easily replicated in other contexts. So we grouped in 3 activities. So the developing educational content about sustainable investments, using a variety of communication channels to inform investors, and also promoting educational activities among other targets, and not only real investors. So for all these 3 activities, we also added some guidance. So, for example, with regard to developing an educational content, we suggested a step-by-step approach, just starting with some key basic questions about sustainability, and just to also to drive the educational activities for retail investors. So start with the basic, and then you can just escalate and go in something more specific about, for example, the technicalities about the feature of the ESG products, the terminology, and so on. We also said that it's important to use different communication channels. So we reported a number of examples from our members in terms of webinars, in terms of social media activity, in terms of television, radio, podcast campaigns. And just we suggested just to start with the easiest thing, that is to upload educational content on one or more websites, and then trying to spread messages using these different communication channels. For example, social media is a relatively cheap way to spread messages, especially for some targets, in particular for the younger. So depending on the stage of development of the market, you could use different channels. Of course, it's not a one-fits-all approach. It would be depending on the development of the market, on the sentiment, I would say, on the momentum that you are living in your country. In the report, we also listed some key messages on sustainability. This stemming from the World Investor Week campaigns. You may be aware of the World Investor Week. This is an IOSCO initiative. It's a 1 week long awareness campaign for retail investor with regard to financial education, in particular to financial education initiatives of the regulators. In the 6th edition is going to be launched. It will be in the next Monday. Will be starting, and at least on the past, also we had the participation of some financial institutions. So also for them is an opportunity to participate with some initiatives. Also for example, with regard to sustainability. So this is an example which we can have synergy between regulators, securities regulators, and other financial market participants. And also we developing financial education activities for other targets. And in this case, it's important to have the synergy with the industry participants. For example, the regulators dedicated some activities for their staff and also developed some e-learning platforms. And also they established some kind of units, departments internally dedicated to sustainability. This is something that I think it can be easily replicated in other contexts. Just final remarks on this. I think it's very important always to conduct surveys, to do this kind of fact-finding exercise in order to understand the needs of the retail investors, so-called evidence-based approach to which anchor the design and implementation of the investor education initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have different approaches. We should adapt financial education for the investor, for retail, the level of knowledge also for retail clients. I take the opportunity to let you know that one thing that we have done from BBVA is to create a calculator for the greenhouse emission of our clients. So far, almost 500,000 of clients have used it. And with this calculator, what we can do is to be aware of our footprint of carbon. Also learn how we can save money if we reduce our energy cost, and then go ahead in the transition that you were mentioning. So I'm going with you. So what are you doing in BlackRock for your clients to really understand, acquire the knowledge, the skills, the competencies that they need in order to be in the market?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And as a fiduciary company, we have the commitment to strengthen financial education amongst our clients and in the communities in which we participate, not only for our clients. So what we do is that throughout the year, we have different webinars and forums with experts from our company and from BlackRock Investment Institute in order to provide the clients and the community the insights for the different trends, for international opportunities, for the insights of market perspectives. We try to be very close to people in that regard. Also, we participate with other stakeholders in order to be active, trying to teach the different parts of the investors, of the different forums. For example, in Mexico, we participate actively with Bolsa Mexicana de Valores and with BIVA. Specifically, for example, with Bolsa Mexicana de Valores, we launched a program in which we went to different universities across the country, private and public universities, and we tried to teach the students from different specialties about finance, about investments, because that's important for us, trying to help them in order to understand better the financial environment. We also participate with some companies, with some institutions. For example, we participated with a company that is Inspiring Girls, that is aimed to provide financial education to women, young women from 16 to 20 years old. And we had a program with 25 young women in which we taught them how to invest, how the exchange market works, how they have to analyze a loan when they are going to ask for money for a bank or a financial institution. So, for example, how to make a budget on an individual basis or a family basis. So those are the ways that we try to make an impact on the community in order to enhance financial education that we think that is very important.
So not only training your investors, but also what surrounds them, right? Their communities. And I'm very glad that you mentioned Inspiring Girls. It's an organization we work with also, like to make visible that women can work in finance and they can access finance and other professions that seem to be a little bit more into the male scenario. So as a last question, I'm gonna ask you, Pasquale, again. Well, financial, we always say, no, and I think has been said in the event a couple of times, financial education is not enough. It's not gonna solve the crisis. It's a very important part, but which are the other practices, initiatives, things that can complement financial education, or rather financial education can complement them, so we can support an adequate development of the sustainable finance market?
Yeah, I will start again with something which is for regulators, and I will refer them to financial institutions and other actors. Also, as I referred earlier about the IOSCO Sustainable Finance Task Force, so that task force published a report in November 2021 that was about asset management, in particular about some recommendations on sustainability-related practices, policies, procedures, and disclosure in asset management. And these recommendations are for securities regulators and for policy makers, but I think that we can just extract some values in this recommendation also for the other actors. There are 5 recommendations. One is about financial and investor education. Is the number 5. Is saying that securities regulators and policymakers should consider promoting financial and investor education activities, and also saying that financial education may also address the professional and licensing obligation of industry participants, so including financial advisors. So it's very important that they have the necessary knowledge, the necessary skills to advise, to provide advice and to provide services to their clients. So it's not only important to have education for retail investors, not only for clients, but also for the staff of the financial participants. And I think that also from these recommendations, we can extract something that could be useful for industry participants in terms of good conduct, in terms of good behaviors, in terms of that we will be expected to develop and also to bring forward a kind of green culture within their institutions, and kind of I would say professionality towards sustainability. Also in terms of corporate social responsibility, corporate identity, and approach with the customers. So also, broadly speaking, to contribute to this process of standardization and harmonization, and avoiding as much as possible greenwashing practices. They should be transparent. They should be able to transfer knowledge about sustainability to their clients, and be ready to take into account their preferences in terms of sustainability. To put, I would say in a nutshell, to accompany them in this transition phase to a new paradigm. So it's a very important role. I think it's kind of, an overall effort that has been done by all the actors involved in this, and I think that IOSCO is in the forefront on this, just to ensure a smooth transition to a more sustainable economy, to a more sustainable finance. And I think that also retail investors should be a crucial node of this network, a network that would aim to preserve our world, to preserve our future and the future of our sons and the future of the next generations. I think that we need a common approach and to work all together because it's something that I think it's irreversible. It's a process that has just started, but it's something that maybe would be a long process, but I think that is irreversible.
Totally agree with that. I think we are running against the clock here. But no, I love that you mentioned also the importance of training employees in these kind of matters, because one would think that employees of a financial institution, they are all knowledgeable about financials or sustainability nowadays, and it's not. We, in fact, have, I love that you are giving me great entrances to promote BBVA's work, but we are implementing a training and skills build program, which is the camp, and we are very happy because up to 84% of employees for BBVA have completed this basic course on sustainability, which is crucial. So not obviously our agents in dealing with investors in corporate investment banking, asset management, they are very knowledgeable, but then you have to make knowledgeable also the people in the branches and be able to respond and make our clients. So I think it's a great point. José Luis, now the last question for you. And I think it's the big question, no? Because we are talking about financial education, how we can, through financial education, help our investors to have a better knowledge and skill. But how you think this financial education can really have an impact, bring a broader outcome for economic and social issues? How it really is going to translate in having environmental and social and economic outcomes?
Yeah, I think that financial education at an individual level is very, very important. It's essential, no? Because it paves the way in which you will make very important decisions in your life. For example, if you're going to ask for a loan, no, the conditions for the loan, you need to understand them. Otherwise, you will be working for the financial institution or whoever is going to give you the money. For example, if you're going to buy a house, the conditions for the mortgage that you're going to take are very important. No? For example, now that we have like this rising rates environment, no, it's very different if you have a mortgage that is fixed rate against variable rate. No? It can make a whole difference in your life, in the budget of your family, for example. No? Saving for retirement is also very important. No? If you have financial education, you will be aware of the importance of saving for retirement, on starting earlier, on the importance of time in that decision, on the importance of diversifying your portfolio, compounding interest. That's very important, and that's going to make an impact in a lot of the decisions that you will have to make along your life if you have a better financial education. We think that financial education makes you more resilient to the financial shocks because you are able to make better financial decisions in your life. Also, we think that financial education and financial stability go hand by hand, no? Because also they're going to make you more able to have like to have better decisions, and that's going to impact economic growth for in the system, no, for different countries, no, for the global economic growth. So that's very important also to have the financial education. No? We also know that, I mean, the road ahead is very big, no, is a very large road, the one towards financial education, and more in a country like Mexico, no. But as a company, we are committed to make a better financial future for our clients, for our communities, and the only way to start is by education, no? By providing education to the people, as we were discussing at the beginning of the conversation, not only to our clients. Some of our clients are like very, have a lot of knowledge regarding investments, regarding finance. But it's more important to make an impact on the broad public and on children, for example, no, since the beginning of their lives, to start understanding finance, to start understanding how to invest and how to make these difficult decisions in their life. I think that that's essential.
Thank you very much. We are running a little bit late, so I'm just going to summarize, I think, in 4 messages what we have heard today here in this panel. So sustainable finance is advancing rapidly, but doesn't come without challenges, and a way to offset those challenges is provide financial education to our investors. That financial education cannot be one solution for one size fits all, but has to be adapted to the level of awareness and the level of knowledge of the investors and the retail clients. And that financial education is not enough. We need to touch other buttons, but ultimately, financial education is going to have an impact not only in the person, not only in the system, but also in the planet. Mm-hmm. So with this, I think I'm gonna end the panel, leave the word to Sergio, and we are very glad to have our Global Director for Sustainability here today. So I think he's going to close, but I'm going to let that to Sergio. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Muchas gracias, Lidia. Como ya lo adelantaba Lidia, para mí es un honor presentarles a Javier Rodríguez Soler, responsable global de sostenibilidad de BBVA, quien nos dará el mensaje de cierre de estos 2 días de trabajo. Adelante, Javier.
Buenos días, o casi ya buenas tardes. Muchas gracias, Sergio. Pues sí, es para mí un honor clausurar este summit, el 5º Edufin Summit que BBVA celebra, el primero que hacemos desde 2 localizaciones separadas, desde Madrid y desde la Ciudad de México. Estamos ya al final de la jornada y, bueno, pues lo hemos estado viendo durante el día de hoy, lo estuvieron ayer viendo en Madrid. Más de 2.000 personas, o presencial o de forma por streaming, están conectadas a este evento. Es un evento en el que hemos contado con 25 expertos de más de 10 nacionalidades, muy internacional, lo hemos visto por la cantidad de acentos que hemos estado escuchando y de experiencias de todas las partes del mundo. Y quería recapitular brevemente lo que hemos estado escuchando hoy, en concreto, aquí en Ciudad de México. Primero con la apertura de Mauricio y luego de Mauricio Pallarés y de nuestro director general en México, CEO de México, Eduardo Osuna. Nos ha dado unos datos y unos mensajes muy relevantes que creo que han sido una forma estupenda de empezar el día. A continuación, Óscar Rosado, presidente de Conducef, nos ha detallado, en particular en el caso de México, mensajes muy importantes de cómo la educación financiera es muy importante en el sentido de no es suficiente con que los bancos proporcionemos productos financieros y la capacidad de tener una cuenta corriente, una tarjeta a un individuo, que es como un medio, sino que tenemos que enseñarle a manejar ese medio. Es como si le damos un coche y no le enseñamos a conducirlo. Sería muy peligroso. Pues lo mismo, si damos oportunidades financieras a empresas y particulares y no les ayudamos a aprender a manejarlas, pues podría ser muy peligroso. Y sin embargo, si saben manejarlas adecuadamente, pues puede tener un efecto muy, muy favorable, obviamente, en las sociedades. A continuación, hemos tenido a Dorothy Singer, que nos ha dado unos datos muy relevantes de muchos mercados emergentes del mundo. Hemos echado de menos, por desgracia, los datos de México para poder comparar, pero espero que pronto los tengamos disponibles. Luego Hugo Nájera ha coordinado el panel con Mayada El Zogbi y con Ana Victoria García y han estado elaborando sobre todo sobre la relevancia de la inclusión financiera, sobre todo para las mujeres. Y han estado comentando cómo la mujer juega un papel fundamental en la sociedad y en las familias, y cómo la inclusión financiera de la mujer, que sea por lo menos tan o más relevante como la del hombre, pues puede dar un impulso muy relevante a este aspecto. A continuación, la revolución de los datos y los temas tecnológicos en el panel moderado por Carlos Serrano, en el que han participado Luz Gómez y Raúl Nava Salazar. Hemos estado viendo todos los aspectos tecnológicos relacionados con la educación financiera. Y, por último, acabamos de terminar, moderado por Lidia del Pozo, que es una auténtica natural de moderadora de paneles, como hemos visto, y una gran organizadora de eventos. Te le quiero dar las gracias personalmente. Con José Luis Ortega y con Pascual Munafó, unas reflexiones muy interesantes que nos han englobado la relevancia de la educación financiera dentro de lo que es la sostenibilidad en general. El vídeo que les ha precedido ha sido un buen aperitivo para luego un panel muy interesante. Ayer tuvimos paneles excelentes también desde Madrid y, bueno, y además hemos querido desde BBVA, que estamos trabajando muy fuertemente por la relevancia de la educación financiera. Ayer anunciábamos que hemos duplicado nuestro objetivo a 2025 de educar financieramente a 2 millones de personas. Y quiero terminar con una explicación muy sencilla, muy aterrizada de qué es la educación financiera. Y empiezo por algo más sencillo todavía, que es qué es el dinero. Vamos a ver, el dinero, como todos sabemos, no es un fin en sí mismo. El dinero simplemente es un medio que hemos inventado la humanidad para manejar de una forma separada cuando tenemos la capacidad de ingresar, porque por nuestro trabajo, por nuestras rentas logramos ingresar y tenemos luego una necesidad de gastar. Lo que ocurre cuando, en el caso de México, todavía una proporción altísima de la población, la única forma que tiene de utilizar el dinero es el cash. Separar esos momentos de cash flow en el momento que uno gana el dinero y uno lo tiene que utilizar es mucho más complicado con el cash. Guardarlo es mucho más complejo. Sacar una rentabilidad a ahorros en cash es materialmente imposible, podríamos decir. Y luego, lo que ocurre en la realidad de las familias y de los seres humanos y de las empresas es que, por ejemplo, cuando uno está trabajando, obtiene unos cash flows de una forma más o menos recurrente, pero luego ocurren dos cosas. Ocurre el momento de la jubilación o del fallecimiento, que es más desgraciado todavía, pero ocurren momentos de la vida, ocurren necesidades con las familias y con los hijos, o con las empresas cuando uno quiere crear una empresa, ocurren eventos inesperados, como puede ser un accidente, para eso están los seguros. Entonces, para separar ese uso de los cash flows de cuando uno ingresa y cuando uno necesita gastar, están los productos financieros y está muy importante la educación financiera. Estamos hablando de una educación financiera básica. Hablaban esta mañana de casi, y es una palabra que puede sonar ofensiva, pero es alfabetización financiera. Yo creo que es una muy buena expresión. Estamos hablando de algo muy básico, que una altísima proporción de la población, y particularmente en mercados emergentes, esta proporción es más alta, que no conoce los temas básicos de que el dinero es algo que es importante saber ahorrarlo, invertirlo y gastarlo cuando más se necesita, para que en esos momentos de estrés, en esas eventualidades, no haya que recurrir a situaciones desesperadas. Entonces, esto, que es muy básico, es muy relevante, y cuando una familia empieza a tener una concepción financiera básica de poder separar sus eventos de ingreso y sus eventos de gasto, el estrés se disminuye considerablemente y el uso de ese dinero se puede optimizar mucho. Eso es la educación financiera, eso es lo que hemos tratado de transmitir hoy con mucho más detalle y sofisticación, obviamente, en este Edufin Summit, quinto Edufin Summit, organizado por BBVA, y no me queda más que organizar a todos nuestro consejo, nuestro advisory board, a todos los panelistas y, sobre todo, a todos los asistentes, el honor de haber estado aquí con todos nosotros y muchísimas gracias por su asistencia.
Muchas gracias, Javier, y muchas gracias a todos los ponentes. Ya dabas ese agradecimiento que tanto ayer como hoy nos acompañaron. Estoy seguro que lo que se planteó en estos 2 días será esa chispa para continuar trabajando en los años que vienen y seguir impulsando la inclusión financiera y teniendo la sostenibilidad como eje de trabajo. Como último acto, quiero pedirles a los presentes en el auditorio de la Torre de BBVA México a que tomen un lugar en el foyer y a quienes nos siguen en línea que permanezcan en la transmisión porque les tenemos una sorpresa. Hoy nos acompaña Carlo Ayón, compositor mexicano de música de concierto, especialista en música para cine. Carlo ha musicalizado cerca de 20 películas, 10 documentales y 2 series de televisión. El concierto de hoy está dividido en 3 partes. La primera constará de piezas de carácter español arregladas por Carlo. Escucharemos a Carmen de Bizet para violín solista y camerata, y piezas emblemáticas como La Malagueña, Noches de Barcelona y una selección del segundo movimiento del concierto de Aranjuez. El siguiente bloque está conformado por obras de Carlo. Algunas de estas piezas son música de concierto y otras de música para cine. Escucharemos Metamorfosis del Vals del Baile de los 41, Transfiguración, Adagio Solemne y Profondo Amore, entre otras piezas. La tercera parte del concierto consta de música mexicana arreglada para camerata de cuerdas. Escucharemos un arreglo de piezas tradicionales de Oaxaca y Veracruz, como La Bruja, El Feo y La Llorona. Y el concierto culminará con el Guapango de José Pablo Moncayo. Muchas gracias a todos y nos vemos en el Edufin Summit 2023.